The story begins with someone biting into a piece of meat and a voice saying they are hungry. The hungry voice belongs to the protagonist, holding a spear and watching a man eat and drink. His stomach growls with envy as he sees someone enjoying their food so much. Suddenly, an angry voice yells, demanding an explanation for why he remains idle at his post. The voice comes from a group of knights, accusing him of laziness at work and saying he's tarnishing the name of the Blelick family. With his head down and just swallowing the insults, the protagonist only apologizes to Raphael. Then Raphael starts complaining about having to pay a salary to a useless person and pulls some coins from his pocket, holding the object as if he wants to flick it. He throws the money at the protagonist's face. With the coins falling to the ground, the knight questions why he hasn't picked up his salary yet. The protagonist crouches down, but he is afraid. As he picks up his money, Raphael calls him incompetent and accuses him of stealing a knight's job. He even orders him to pick up the coins with more enthusiasm, saying he doesn't even deserve his salary and threatens him with execution. Our hero clenches his fist, unable to hold back any longer. And out of nowhere, his insatiable stomach growls, scaring the other knights. Raphael is outraged by the sound. Now more irritated than ever, he prepares a kick while calling him ungrateful. When the foot meets its target, the sound of bones hitting metal boots echoes through the place. The protagonist writhes on the ground, another knight compares him to a worm and even demands he return to work. Demanding that he get up, Raphael places his foot over the protagonist's ear. Then a beautiful girl dressed in white armor with golden hair interrupts the mess. Raphael removes his foot from his head and complies with Roxy Hart's request, though with disgust. The group of knights moves away from the scene, leaving the pair behind. But before leaving completely, Raphael looks back and smiles sadistically. The protagonist notices the smile and can't believe the audacity of that son of a bitch. Roxy worries about the protagonist and calls him by name, Fate. Fate looks at his heroine, unbelieving that someone so important and beautiful remembered what he was called. Getting up, he replies that he was fine and thanks her for the help. Then Roxy promises that if they do that again, she will do something about it. But Fate declines her offer, waving his hands nervously and smiling awkwardly. Then, out of nowhere, he runs off, saying he needs to go. While running, Fate only wishes that Roxy would follow her own path without having to worry about him. The city is quite busy in that late afternoon, and the protagonist was still hungry even after eating. As Fate walks, he reflects on how his life has been miserable since birth. In that world, people are born with a skill granted to them from the start of life, a divine blessing. But some individuals are born with a terrible fate, bearing skills of little value. The protagonist's skill is called gluttony, an ability that makes him extremely hungry. Because of such a simple talent, he feels like a useless person in that world. Then there are others who go beyond exceptions, like the holy knights who are on a completely different level. It's impossible for a nobody to defeat them in a fair fight. Fate remembers something from that moment, Raphael's malicious smile. As he walks, he hopes Roxy doesn't become a target of those filthy knights. Fate is arriving at his post and finds his blonde friend standing guard in his place. He feels relieved to see her doing well. Then he notices something strange above. Hooded intruders were invading from over the wall. That place was a blind spot in Roxy's field of vision. Fate quickens his steps to warn her. Roxy notices him and is surprised to see him, thinking he had gone home. Then Fate warns her about the looming danger, entering through the east wall. Roxy asks if it's true, and the protagonist confirms it is. The holy knight tilts her head, as if wanting to set aside her troubles for another time. Then she stands up and smiles at Fate, understanding what needs to be done. She passes the spear and leaves the guard duty to the protagonist. Before she can draw her sword, our supposed hero calls the knight's attention and wishes her good luck. Smiling with confidence, Roxy assures she can handle everything. Then the holy knight draws her sword and sets out on her mission. But Fate can't shake off his concern. It's already night and the sound of growls and clashing metal sounds like an orchestra play in the background. Then silence falls over the place. With the calm, Fate assumes Roxy managed to take care of the problem. Suddenly, the sound of blood droplets breaks the knight's silence. Someone was approaching the protagonist. Fate, without seeing who was coming near, turns around thinking it was Roxy returning. But all he sees is a hooded man leaning on his sword like a cane. He belittles the protagonist and tells him to get out of the way. Seeing an intruder who had managed to escape Roxy, Fate becomes frightened. But he decides to stay to protect his friend's reputation and prevent her from being blamed for a botched job. Even with fear making his hands tremble, he still tries to grip his spear firmly. Then he charges at his enemy and yells, gathering all the courage he has in his soul. Fate lands a blow to the intruder's belly. The man coughs up blood from the attack and is defeated. Our hero can hardly believe he managed to do that, but something activates deep within him, like the heart of a beast coming back to life. At that moment, his gluttony skill activates on its own and consumes something from the intruder. As it consumes, he feels his stomach filling like a bottle being filled with water. 2 windows appear saying that status points and 2 skills have been added, but someone calls his name, snapping him back to his senses. It was Roxy, running up to him worried about his physical condition. She touches his shoulders, wanting to check if he had any wounds. But at the moment of the touch, the protagonist feels like he heard her say something more. He's a bit surprised since the knight hadn't spoken those words. Still without an answer, Roxy tries to shake some reaction out of him. Then Fate finally responds to her. showing that he didn't even get a scratch. Finally getting a response from him, she calms down, but the protagonist hears something coming from Roxy. Having his answer, the knight slowly pulls away, letting go of the protagonist's shoulders. Fate is confused because those words hadn't come from her mouth. But with no time for that, he notices the body behind his friend. Fate asks her to take all the credit for dealing with the intruders, but the girl refuses the request, thinking it would be unfair. However, Fate insists out of fear of the possible consequences from Raphael if he found out about the incident. So Roxy agrees to take all the credit, even if she doesn't like it. The protagonist bows his head, thanking his friend for agreeing to his request. But Roxy contradicts him, saying that she should be the one thanking him. If it weren't for Fate's warning, the Hart family's reputation would have been damaged, so she suggests a reward. Of course, the ever-kind Fate wants to reject the offer, especially coming from a holy knight. But the girl uses the most powerful move in the world, the Anin pouty face. Unable to resist her cuteness, he blushes. Thinking about how to reward the protagonist, she touches her chin in doubt. Clapping her hands quickly, she comes to a conclusion. Roxy offers him a job with her family, promising to talk to her father about it. Fate can't believe he's hearing such an extraordinary offer. He clenches his fist in frustration, confessing that his skill is useless and that he still works for the Blelick family. Roxy calms him, saying he doesn't need to worry about those people, and she even argues, asking if the protagonist plans to work with them for the rest of his life. Not wanting to imagine his life with those people any longer, he accepts the job offer. Since it's already night, Roxy suggests he go home and rest. Before he leaves, she asks Fate to come to the Hart residence the day after tomorrow at noon. The protagonist almost starts crying upon hearing that, but he lowers his head and thanks her again. Hiding his tears, he sheds tears of joy for finally having something good in life. A red moon shines in the sky, surrounded by ominous clouds. Fate wore black clothes and held a black sword in his hand, standing atop a pile of defeated enemies. A skull-shaped mask covered his face with blood-red eyes staring directly into the camera. But Fate was sleeping like a log. And then he wakes up with a big scare. Waking up on a hay bed like a malnourished horse, the protagonist feels like he had a strange dream. With the morning light touching his eyes, he reflects on yesterday's events, wishing that all of it wasn't just a dream. At that moment, he remembers that he heard something unusual mentioning he had gained 2 skills. So Fate uses one of the new skills, Appraisal. A character sheet window like in an RPG appears before him. But there's something very strange about the numbers he sees. His stats went from 1 to 3 digits and 2 new skills were added. Fate realizes he read Roxy's mind when she touched his shoulder thanks to the mind reading skill. He wonders if all of this is an effect of the gluttony skill, a skill capable of consuming the life of those it devours, digesting their essence and transforming it into power, only satisfied when it reaps a soul. Fate smiles with a confidence never seen before in this story, already knowing what to do with his new life. The scene changes to a city map showing the direction of each district. Choosing which path to take, Fate begins his first steps as a hero. After some time wandering, he finally arrives at the commercial district of Seafart, where he observes the shops around. Then he stops and checks his pocket. All he manages to pull out is 2 silver coins. Fate intended to buy a weapon there, as he knew that a high-class shop wouldn't even let him in. While looking at various pieces of equipment, an old man catches his attention, asking if the protagonist is looking for a weapon. Fate is surprised to see him guess what he wanted. The vendor says it was obvious from the way the protagonist was looking. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the old man smiles and shows the shop's goods. The protagonist feels comfortable with the friendly reception and accepts the offer. But before Fate can choose something, the vendor asks about the size of his wallet. Our broke hero just shows 2 silver coins. The vendor looks at his hand with disdain, as if calling him pathetic without needing to say a word. Completely changing his attitude, he calls Fate a broke miser, starts treating him with less kindness. Then he tells him to search through the pile of rusty and broken swords. Fate looks at those weapons with discouragement, and the vendor just mocks his poverty. All he could do at that moment was accept the insults because it hurt less. After all, a broke guy like him wouldn't get a better deal with just 2 silver coins. So Fate approaches the swords. With the appraisal skill active in his eyes, he analyzes what they could do. In the end, those blades would cause more damage through tetanus than through cutting. So our broke hero decides to close his eyes and go with luck. Upon touching a black sword, Fate hears voices. Startled as if seeing a ghost, he drops the sword faster than a devil fleeing the cross. The blades seem to be able to speak. Fate is frightened upon hearing a sword talk. While cleaning a weapon, the vendor tells him to leave. He isn't going to choose anything. Our hero looks at him and observes his reaction, then realizes that no one else had heard the sword speak. Even a bit hesitant, he tries to slowly pick the blade up from the ground. Then it starts talking again, and Fate assumes it's an effect of the mind-reading skill, wondering if this black blade from Sword Art Online is cursed or if there's something special about it. He decides to use appraisal and see the weapon's stats. Unfortunately, he only finds out that it is called Greed, and that it is a one-handed sword. He finds it odd to only see the name and the object's description, without even showing what it does. Fate looks at the basket of damaged swords, stating how that weapon was being treated as something useless and cheap. Our melancholic hero relates to its situation. Then the sword grows impatient and asks if he's going to buy it. Compared to the pile of damaged weapons, it was clearly the only one capable of cutting. Fate agrees to the talking sword's offer, since he didn't have money for another and also sympathized with it. The sword rejoices and supposes this could be the work of Fate, then asks the name of its future wielder. The protagonist replies saying his name is Fate Graphite and then asks what its name is. The sword introduces itself as Greed, but right after revealing its name, the vendor hurries Fate to make a choice. Our cocky hero gets annoyed with the old man's complaints. He walks with wide strides up to the vendor, slaps his hand on the table and places the coins on it. Not liking this, the vendor almost demands an explanation, but quickly changes his attitude with the arrival of another customer. Now that Fate had left the shop wielding a new sword, he walks through the busy city, then decides to start by hunting some goblins. The sword agrees, saying it's a good idea for a noob like him. But the sword warns him not to get too full of himself, as goblins can quickly gather like a swarm. Upon hearing that, Fate immediately remembers an old man at the bar warning him about the danger of those little green monsters. Our rookie hero arrives at the southern gate of the capital, already crowded with people wearing armor and sheathed weapons. Seeing the crowd, he wonders if that place is a gathering point for monster hunts. Fate also assumes this is a good place to form a party, even if just a temporary one. Thinking about that only makes him feel lonelier, but the sword quickly comforts him by reminding him that she's there with him. Then a man catches the attention of our desolate hero. Seeing Fate carrying a sword, he assumes the protagonist is a warrior. Since his friend didn't show up, he needed one more member. Fate gets super happy with the offer, finally being able to gain new companions. But before our optimistic hero can say anything more, the man asks for his level. The protagonist proudly says that his level is 1. A lonely silence falls over the protagonist, who's left standing there looking foolish. Greed quickly tells him to give up on forming a party. No one would take a level 1 noob to fight monsters. Fate sighs, letting his expectations slip away like the wind. He had been hopeful that he would be able to join a group thanks to the sword, but Greed quickly warns him never to show his gluttony skill to others. The protagonist is surprised to learn that the sword knows about his skill, even though he never told her. Greed responds that he and Fate are alike, and that one day he'll understand everything, whether he wants to or not. Thinking to himself, the protagonist agrees that it's not a good idea to reveal his skill to other people. After all, the more people who know about gluttony, the more likely he is to be hunted or executed. Even after reaching that conclusion, it doesn't discourage him. Thanks to the great potential of this ability, our hero can become so powerful that no one will be able to touch him. Confident and looking ahead, he gets ready to begin the goblin hunt. South of the capital, also nicknamed Goblin Field, the place where they used as their territory. These little green guys attacked and looted passing wagons, disturbing the peace of many travelers. And one of those mischief makers is sleeping completely alone, snoring loudly and peacefully. Fate observes him while hiding in the bushes. Noticing that there are no enemies nearby, the sleepyhead is completely defenseless. But before making the first move, the protagonist activates appraisal to analyze the monster. On the green shorty's window, we can see that his attributes are mediocre and he only has one small buff skill. The name of the monster includes the fighter class, suggesting the existence of other goblin types. His stats weren't all that either. Easy prey for our hero. His ability increased strength by a small amount, suggesting the existence of stronger buffs. The snot bubble kept changing size as it came out of the monster's nose. The creature was sound asleep. Our hero sees this as a great opportunity for a free kill, the A's. Determined, he jumps like a cat hunting a mouse, waking the goblin. Fate defeats it with a quick slash and gluttony, wastes no time savoring its meal. Observing his victory and with the monster on the ground, our hero catches his breath. The skill strength up, small, was successfully added, making Fate happy. Then he uses appraisal to check the spoils of his victory. His stats had increased a little, making the protagonist feel as happy as if it were his first headshot. Proud of himself, he celebrates getting stronger. But Buzzkill Greed interrupts his joy and says that killing a goblin isn't anything amazing. Fate retorts, saying he had never defeated a monster before and always ran when he saw one. Finally, the protagonist looks at what's left of the goblin. He cuts off the former creature's ear and puts the cartilage in a bag, thinking about selling the loot later. Even if the selling price is just 10 copper per pair, our ear-hunting hero hopes to collect more. But just like a good Brazilian, even earning little, Fate never gives up. After a while, 2 goblins are patrolling, looking in opposite directions. Fate notices there's a shield bearer among them and wanting to know more about this new shorty, uses appraisal. He finds out it's a goblin guard with the skill Stamina Up, Small. Our stealthy hero realizes they're a duo compensating for each other's weaknesses. He plans to attack the goblin with the highest DPS potential, the fighter, while avoiding confrontation with the shield bearer. Fate holds his sword with both hands, wanting to make sure he gets both skills without getting too hurt. Then the goblin guard says something in goblin tongue that sounded more like a rat squeaking, and the fighter replies with a guy. Both switch positions. A short one with the sword is now closer to our countryside hero. Fate notices the change in position and wastes no time to attack. Fate stomps hard on the grass and charges at the goblin fighter. But he is quickly noticed by the 2 monsters, and the shield bearer takes the lead with his shield. Fate sees the position switch, but it's too late to change the direction of his attack. Even though the cut is blocked, the blade simply pierces through the goblin's defense. While Fate can't believe it, his gluttony quickly feeds off a new kill. He looks at his sword in disbelief. He had definitely gotten an incredible weapon. The goblin fighter realizes there's no chance of winning and waves his sword, trying to intimidate our hero. Fate ignores the bluff and simply slashes the creature. After securing another victory, he notices that he didn't receive a new skill from the goblin fighter. Checking his attributes, it seems he can't stack skills of the same level and name. If he wants to get a new skill, he'll need to kill other types of monsters. While collecting his loot, Fate asks Greed why she was so mistreated despite being such an amazing sword. The answer is simple: she's extremely selective about who can wield her, making the protagonist feel a bit proud. Fate smiles, knowing the sword could be rude sometimes, but promises not to disappoint her. Some time passes, and the protagonist's sack of ears is already quite full. Observing the amount of loot he gathered, Fate wonders why so many goblins started attacking. So he decides to check the result of his grind, abusing the appraisal skill again. Upon seeing his attribute window, the protagonist yells in surprise. His physical stats had already surpassed the 1,000 mark, leaving him with a happiness mixed with shock. But strangely, his level was still 1 despite collecting so many orbs. Greed explains that his skill is a sacrilege, so he cannot level up, leaving the protagonist stunned. Gluttony is a skill that allows him to absorb the stats and skills of other living beings, thus rejecting the divine concept of levels and being destined to be shunned by the gods. While the protagonist digests the information, Greed also explains that this is the reason he had all stats at 1 initially. The sword tries to say something more, but decides not to finish the sentence, leaving Fate curious. But Greed changes the subject and says it's better to return to the capital. Our protagonist tries to press her to talk, and then the belly of our gluttonous hero starts growling loudly. With no other choice, he agrees and thinks he's done enough for today. Fate promises himself that next time he'll hunt hobgoblins in the forest. Fate finds the capital bustling, full of people walking back and forth, living their daily lives. Our hero keeps walking until he reaches a building. Upon entering, he sees very excited men exchanging punches and shouting at each other. Fate already knew a guild would be like this, but he didn't expect it to be this intense. Then he gets shoved when a man violently bumps into him. Even after apologizing, Fate only receives insults from the other guy. Then the receptionist calls for the next person. He feels relieved that he can finally finish his business with the guild and get out of that mess. Putting his sack full of green ears on the counter, he says he wants to sell the items inside. The receptionist is surprised by the number of cartilages and asks if he hunted all that with a big party. The girl assumes the protagonist generated a lot of aggro to get so much loot, and Fate doesn't understand what she means. Aggro is when a species holds a grudge against a person. Now the MC understands why so many goblins attacked him, but the girl notices his rags and assumes he fought a lot to end up in that condition. Greed says that's how he always dresses, and Fate gets irritated and tells her to shut up, scaring the receptionist. The protagonist gets embarrassed and laughs nervously, explaining that he was telling the loud guys in the guild to quiet down. The girl smiles and says she'll get the reward, leaving the counter. With his stomach growling, Fate starts thinking about what he'll have for dinner, hoping for something really satisfying. The sword gets his attention and demands maintenance, since she feels filthy from how dirty she is. Fate, a bit embarrassed, remembers that he never did any repairs on the weapon since buying it, so he decides to go to a nearby blacksmith. Some time passes, Fate leaves the blacksmith's shop thanking him for the service, and this time Greed is in his sheath. Taking out his coin pouch, he shakes it a bit to see if there's any money left and realizes he still has enough. Our unlucky hero starts wondering if working with the Bloodlicks for 5 years wasn't just wasted time. But that was all water under the bridge now. The protagonist now has a future he can walk toward. The sword recommends that Fate learn to perform maintenance on her himself, or he might end up in trouble. Paying 10 copper coins just to repair a sword that barely had any scratches every day could get expensive. There's also the fact that blacksmiths won't be available everywhere during his adventures. Understanding that he needs to take care of his weapon, he decides to buy repair tools after dinner, making Greed proud. Passing by pastry and bakery vendors selling their goods on the street, Fate thinks about having a luxurious meal. And luxurious food means a well-grilled pecan steak with sauce on top. Arriving in front of a restaurant, the protagonist already smells a delicious gourmet aroma. But before he can enter, a bald man approaches. For the second time that day, Fate gets bumped into by the hairless individual who was dragging a little girl. The protagonist falls to the ground from the force of the impact while the girl tries to recover. The bald man gets irritated and curses at our hero, who keeps getting run over by ill-mannered people. Fate gets angry for being pushed like that and plans to confront him. Then the bald man forces the girl to stand up. Our hero finds the amount of force used excessive and tries to help her. Upon touching her shoulders, a mind-reading skill activates. Crying and carrying sadness in her eyes, she pleads for him to save her. Fate is shocked by what just happened. The bald man walks away, dragging the little girl with him. Not understanding anything, he just watches them walk off into the distance. While observing the bald man taking the girl away, Fate questions the nature of that brute. Using appraisal, the protagonist tries to find out more about him. The character window reveals the name Cass in black, and that his build is more focused on physical strength. But what shocks Fate the most is the fact that the abductor has no skill. Greed suggests it might be a hiding skill, an ability that hides the user's information as if blurring their status. The sword asks what Fate plans to do with this information from here on. Cassin might be a warrior with fewer attributes than our hero, but his eyes were those of an experienced assassin. Fate starts to worry about the girl, wondering if the man would cut the plant before it even had a chance to take root. Sighing, he decides to stalk Cassim. Greed asks if he really wants to save the girl. Our hero begins walking, saying he just can't stand still when something bad is happening in front of him. But Greed offers a tip before the protagonist can continue with his plan. She tells him not to have compassion for assassins. Fate accepts the advice and continues his mission. Each step feels heavier as the protagonist reflects on taking someone's fate into his own hands. Fate wasn't doing this because he wanted to be a hero. He just wants to help those who suffer before his eyes. He follows the abductor to a less populated area of the city. Fate sees Cassim and the girl entering a warehouse with a broken window. Wondering what they were doing there, the sword quickly answers his doubt, revealing two horrible possibilities. Fate didn't like either of them, so he approaches the hideout and peeks through the broken window, managing to see the two of them. Realizing the girl was chained, the protagonist concludes that Kasim really was a kidnapper. A loud noise echoes inside the place. The criminal was tormenting the girl so much that she falls to the floor. Kasim was loving the experience. He enjoyed seeing how children behave after being given a brutal lesson. Lying on the floor, she hears the terrible words of her abductor, calling her useless and laughing at her misery. Kasim's evil laughter enters her ears like a song of terror, making her cry in despair. Fate watches all of it in shock. Seeing the girl lying on the floor like that, alone and being mistreated by someone much stronger than her, makes our hero remember his own sad childhood, bullied by Raphael and his peers. These memories make his teeth clench in fury, to the point that even greed asks him to calm down and wait. Kasim continues with his cruelty and calls the girl trash, but then reveals she will be sold to a holy knight. He asks the girl if she wouldn't be happy with such an honor, but is answered with a shake of the head and refusal. Asking her to be a good obedient girl, he pulls her by the hair and threatens to turn her into a statistic. Kasim prepares a kick, insinuating that he's done worse to another boy who didn't last even a week. The tip of his shoot hits its target, creating a sound that seemed to be something painful. The girl calls hard and writhes on the floor, while the abductor just smiles sadistically. Fate almost prepares to go in, but greed asks him to wait or else the story would end too soon. The protagonist holds his frustration in silence for as long as he can. Fate grits his teeth in fury, but the sword reminds him that the abductor has far more experience in real combat than he does. Letting out a sigh and allowing his anger to deflate, our hero calms down. Then he looks inside the place, trying to come up with a strategy, noticing there were several boxes in there. Our hero considers sneaking in between the wooden crates, but before he can execute his plan, the sword warns him that the abductor is leaving. Fate takes advantage of the criminal's absence and jumps inside, startling the girl. The girl looks at her savior with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Fate prepares to draw greed from her sheath. Our hero easily cuts the chains with the black sword. Seeing the girl is free, he tells her to run away. The girl is overjoyed to finally escape that nightmare. Fate extends his hand to her, wanting to speed up the process, but hope is interrupted by Kasim's shadow looming over them. The abductor smiled like a man watching a rat caught in a trap. Drawing his sword from the sheath, the criminal threatens to finish off the hero to make the girl more obedient. Fate readies his stance and positions himself in front of the victim, trying to be the last line of defense against Kasim. Walking slowly toward Fate, Kasim wore a disturbing smile and a terrifying killer's gaze. At that moment, the protagonist realized he had fallen into a trap when he took advantage of Kasim's supposed exit. Pointing his blade at the MC's face, the criminal mocks his heroic act, saying it would only lead to an early end. With trembling legs and cold sweat running down his body, our hero tries to lift his spirit by screaming internally. The enemy gets even closer, mocking the visible fear reflected in his shaky knees. Even scared, Fate evaluates his options until greed tells him to retreat to the back of the room. Before the protagonist can question the weapon, she reminds him how they managed to cut the chains. Fate understands the plan and gains more confidence. Running without thinking about tomorrow, the protagonist grabs the girl's hand and runs from the abductor. Kasim joyfully chases his victims, happy to have a hunt. The two become cornered, surrounded by a prison of wooden crates. Fate faces the approaching enemy. Kasim blocks the only escape route and walks slowly to pounce. Then our hero tells the girl to move away. Clutching the hilt of the black sword, he gathers the courage and confidence to fight for what he believes is right. Both fighters are within striking range of each other, their blades waiting for action. The first move comes from Fate, who attacks while letting out a powerful cry of courage. Kasim mocks our hero once again and prepares to block the strike. A black slash cuts through the enemy's sword, defeating Kasim with a single attack. The abductor can't believe his defense was overcome so easily. He collapses face first to the floor, completely defeated. Greed congratulates Fate for making Kasim careless and overly confident, which led him to fall into the trap. But first things first, our hero demands answers from his enemy. Grabbing him by the collar, the protagonist threatens to read his mind if he doesn't speak. But before departing to the afterlife, Kasim reveals a very familiar name, Hud-Blelek. Fate freezes upon hearing that name, the source of many traumas in his life. Then he vows to make that wretched family pay for their heinous crimes. Gluttony activates and two skills are added, concealment and the art, Sharp Edge. Fate thinks the art skill effect is cool, but Greed sees no reason to be impressed with such a simple skill. The protagonist gets annoyed with the sword, but is glad to know the abductor never had the chance to use it. Then our hero looks at his fallen opponent, imagining how things might have turned out differently if he had fought back. A loud growl cuts through the mood, this time coming from the little girl. The protagonist smiles at her, saying he's hungry too. The scene shifts to a restaurant. It was already night. With bread and vegetable soup on the table, the food sparkled like stars. Salivating and hungry, the girl hesitates, but Fate encourages her to eat. With trembling hands holding a wooden spoon, she swallows a piece of meat. Finally feeling something good in her life, the girl's eyes light up with joy. Then she starts eating as if there were no tomorrow, and Fate decides to match her pace. Some time passes, and the night is lit by the stars in the sky. The protagonist discovers that the girl came from a humble orphanage. Arriving there, our hero decides to say goodbye to the girl by giving her one last affectionate head pat. But before they can both go their separate ways, the girl tries to say something. She hesitates out of embarrassment, but still gathers enough courage to say thank you. Fate feels flattered and thanks her back. The girl runs to the nuns, waving goodbye with a cheerful and lively hand. The protagonist smiles in satisfaction, gently waving goodbye to her. Taking heavy steps back into the city, our hero's resolve grows stronger. Greed notices Fate's serious expression and asks what's wrong. Realizing the gravity of his situation, he assumes he has a long road ahead, especially because he's about to meet his waifu at her house, making his stomach ache from anxiety. Greed thinks it's too early to feel that way. Fate justifies himself by saying Roxy is way out of his league. The protagonist looks at his sword in frustration and asks how she can be so carefree. But there's something urgent our hero had been ignoring until now. What to wear to see Roxy. We're at the blacksmith's shop near the guild. A boy prepares to leave. Wearing new clothes and finally looking like a real person, Fate is ready to meet Roxy. Even Greed agrees that a guy like him could look handsome in the right outfit. The protagonist sets off toward his new life, reflecting on the last few days and wondering if all of this is just a dream. Arriving at the massive gate of a wall, he can't hide his amazement at the size of the place. Fate approaches a nearby guard. A bit nervous, he announces his name, saying he has an appointment with Roxy Hart. Looking into a book, a guard confirms his presence and asks the protagonist to follow him. Entering the wall, Fate is impressed by the beauty of the mansion and its garden. Even after walking around the place for a while, he notices no one around and wonders if everyone's working. Then they reach a female figure standing with her back turned, her golden hair flowing in the wind. Fate almost doesn't recognize her, but it was someone very familiar and dear to him. The female figure turns around. It's Roxy in a beautiful white dress, thanking the protagonist for coming. Our shy hero is surprised to see that the knight who always wore armor is now wearing a woman's outfit. Roxy asks if something's wrong, and Fate replies that he's just speechless at such beauty. The girl blushes at the accidental flirt from the protagonist, but she quickly regains her composure and proudly says that even she likes wearing a dress now and then. Roxy also mentions how unrecognizable Fate looks in his new outfit. Then a brief and lonely silence falls over her face as she asks the protagonist to follow her. They both walk further into the garden, circling the mansion. Fate finds it strange that they haven't gone inside the house yet, but he quickly learns the reason. The pair arrives at a large tombstone, decorated with armor and flowers laid on the grave. Roxy kneels and gently touches the tomb near the floral arrangements, telling her father that she has hired someone. Fate is surprised to hear that and can't utter a single word. A consoling breeze softly touches Roxy's hair, making each golden strand move to hide her mourning. Then she says it was 5 days ago that her father passed away in Gallia. Greed explains that Gallia is the continent to the south of the capital, a place completely overrun by powerful monsters. 5 days ago means her father died 1 day before the incident with the intruders. Roxy mentions that the most important duty of a holy knight is to defeat the invading monsters from Gallia. Fate is impressed by the responsibility those warriors bear, but her father's death wasn't caused by a monster. Roxy turns and asks Fate if he knows about the living disaster of Gallia. Greed hears the conversation and mentions another name, Sky Dragon, and being treated like an earthquake or a flood, a natural disaster impossible to stop. The dragon appeared out of nowhere and attacked the army led by Roxy's father at the edge of the continent, annihilating all the soldiers. After attending her father's funeral and inheriting the family estate, she finally got rid of all the bureaucracy that afternoon. Even trying to keep her head up, the girl shifts her gaze to the horizon, smiling melancholically. Fate is surprised to see that sacred knight looking so fragile and in mourning, awakening a dark desire within him. Even in grief, Roxy declares that she is willing to raise the reputation of the Hart family name. With a slight smile, she asks if the protagonist could help with that task. Fate had a determined look and already knew the answer without thinking twice. Facing Roxy, he swears on her father's grave that he will do everything he can to help his friend. Fate finally sleeps in a comfortable bed in a proper room with the morning light coming through the window. Upon waking up, he stretches to shake off the sleep in his tendons and lets out a long groan. Looking at the window, he sees that it's another beautiful day in his life. Meeting a servant, Fate exchanges greetings with him. Then they start planning what to do and later go work in the garden trimming the plants. Since he arrived, our hero tried various jobs, but gardening was the one he fit into the most. Then he looks at a large tree and realizes that it will soon need another trimming. Night falls in the city, and the mansion's servants are gathered in the dining room with plates of food on the table. Upon seeing a juicy piece of meat covered in sauce, Fate is delighted to finally have a luxurious meal. The gleam of desire in his eyes draws the attention of the other servants, who call him greedy and make gentle jokes. Eating with immense happiness, it didn't compare at all to the suffering he lived through with Rafal. But something feels off to him. With each bite, he didn't feel satisfied at all. Discouraged by the continued hunger, Fate questions what the point was of eating. Then someone calls his name, startling the protagonist. It was Roxy who was calling him, and she looked worried. She approaches Fate wanting to see if he was okay, saying he looked a bit pale. Not wanting to touch her, our hero lies and says he's fine, until he feels a horrible sensation in his body, shaking him from within. Fate collapses to the ground, unable to even hear his friend's calls. Some time passes, and the protagonist wakes up in his bed, bathed in moonlight. He gets up and realizes that he was so hungry he fainted. Not understanding anything that was happening, he looks to the side and notices a letter. In it, Roxy was asking Fate to take the day off and rest. Embarrassed for collapsing right in front of his friend, he covers his face with his hand, trying to hide his own shame. Looking at the window and feeling the moonlight, he concludes that he slept the whole day. After that, he asks Greed what was happening to his body. The sword responds that it's already too late. Greed explains that the more souls the gluttony skill consumes, the stronger it becomes. Now that it has a sense of taste, it desires more. The reason for the insatiable hunger was due to starvation mode. Fate doesn't understand what the sword meant by all that. She replies that she'll show him something and asks him to look in the mirror. Upon seeing his reflection, the protagonist is startled to see the proof of starvation mode, his pupils red as blood. Fate stands paralyzed as he looks at his own reflection. Greed only adds to his terror by saying the hunger will only get worse. Reluctant to know what he already fears, our hero asks what would happen if he didn't consume more souls. The sword responds that he will die of hunger or begin to attack the people around him. Hearing the answer he refused to accept, Fate feels the weight of destiny on his shoulders and stares at the floor in despair. Without pity for his friend, Greed says he doesn't have much time left. The scene shifts to show Fate outside the mansion with his sword sheathed at his waist. Making final adjustments to his black outfit, our hero prepares to face his possible future. Then he runs as if fleeing from his own shadow that chased him like death itself. Panting, each step drains a bit more of his physical vigor. His hunger makes every movement painful even without being physically tired. Like a wolf hunting its prey, Fate picks up a delicious scent in the air. Following the trail of the smell and staggering like a dying man, the protagonist arrives at the gate guard. Worried upon seeing the protagonist in such bad shape, he tries to help him. But the smell continues to linger in the air and refuses to leave Fate's nose alone, making his eyes even more terrifying. Upon seeing that look, the guard screams like a little girl seeing the big bad wolf. The scream draws the attention of another man nearby. As he approaches Fate, he also gets startled and lets out a girly squeal. Then the protagonist shows a paper to the terrified guards and walks through the gate. As he moves away from Roxy's mansion wall, he wonders what those squeals were about. Greed replies that the red eyes make him look like a predator, scaring people weaker than him. Fate worries about the possibility of the guards thinking he's suspicious. As long as he doesn't show the red eyes again, they'll only think of him as a scary guy. What would make him suspicious is acting strangely, says the sword. Fate agrees as he walks through the city. The urban center was bustling with many people living their lives, but there was a certain aroma surrounding them. That scent grabs Fate's attention, making his eyes glow with hunger. The smell was so delicious it made the protagonist's body react on its own, forcing him to hold back. Continuing on his path, he comes across a suspicious hooded group. As he gets closer to them, he realizes that the food aroma was coming from them. One of the hooded figures starts to turn around, and Fate is immediately startled to see some familiar faces. It was Raphael and his two usual friends. Our hero doesn't seem to have been noticed by the group and observes them from afar as they enter a building. The protagonist finds all this very suspicious for 3 sacred nights. Then more hooded figures appear wandering nearby and Fate thinks about investigating further. But before he can think more about the situation, his stomach growls. Realizing he didn't have much time left, he decides to leave this mystery for later. He runs with all his strength to hunt a soul before the worst can happen. Arriving at the gate that leads out of the city, several people are gathered chatting. Their scent is irresistible, making Fate's stomach growl even more. Greed explains that these individuals want to take advantage of the full moon to hunt more safely and face fewer mobs. Enduring the smell, Fate swallows his own saliva to try to suppress his gluttony. Feeling that his tolerance level was reaching the limit, he hurries up. A group of men notices the protagonist's presence. Seeing that he's going alone, they mock his equipment, saying no one would help him in trouble. They even pretend to offer him a spot in their group, but quickly make it clear it was just a joke. Fate just accepts the insults. Running desperately across the field and carrying his sword, Fate hunts like a limping and starving tiger. He defeats a goblin, but it's still not enough. Then he slaughters another, and he's still hungry. Once again, another short one departs the realm of the living. Gluttony needed more and much more. Wielding his sword frenetically, Fate trimmed down the goblins as quickly as a weed cutter. But that didn't satisfy his red eyes, which still emitted a murderous aura. The goblins gathered and tried to stop the protagonist's assault, but Fate simply cuts through the monsters with a black slash that grew redder with each blow. Battle marks and fallen goblins were scattered across the vegetation. The scene radiated an aura of war. A trail of defeated monsters led to a somewhat tired Fate, still holding his weapon firmly. Slightly relieved, his hunger had subsided a bit, but it still wasn't enough. His eyes were still red. Holding his sword, the protagonist feels lost. Greed says that just goblins won't be enough. He'll have to hunt somewhere else. Even hungry, our hero feels stronger than usual. It was a strength buff as a result of starvation mode. With everything explained, Fate starts thinking about his next target, the hobgoblins that live in the forest. There are 3 types of this more evolved goblin: fighters, archers, and guards. The most troublesome for our hero would be the archers, who fired arrows with tips infected by their excrement. Fate is grateful for the teachings of his servant Senpai about goblins, something that now proves very useful. After walking a bit, he finds 2 of those green creatures resting. Fate uses appraisal to study his enemy. The hobgoblin fighter had a skill specialized in 2-handed swords, while the guard had medium stamina up. Fate slowly approaches one of them. He feels a bit guilty for attacking someone sleeping, but continues after apologizing. Attacking one of the sleepers, a part of it flies off into the distance. The sound of the hobgoblin piece bouncing on the ground wakes the other enemy. Seeing what's left of his colleague, he tries to call for help. But before the sound could leave his mouth, Fate quickly silences him. Gluttony is activated and absorbs the souls of both enemies, consuming both skills. Fate felt a bit fuller now. Leaving the two defeated enemies behind, our hero walks toward the next hunt. After a certain amount of time in solitary battles, Fate had already defeated 45 hobgoblins. Then something strange happened to his body. His eyes had changed color and returned to normal, making the hunger vanish as well. Greed confirms that starvation mode had ended, and Fate feels relieved. Tired, he thinks about getting some rest. Greed recommends doing it on top of a tree to avoid ground enemies. Agreeing with the idea, our hero starts climbing the nearby tree. While climbing, he realizes he'll need to defeat several monsters to satisfy his gluttony from now on. Greed says that gluttony isn't easily satisfied, so hunting monsters is a priority. Fate agrees, though disheartened. Some time passes, and Fate is still resting atop the tree. He decides it's time to return. Then a sound of something massive echoes under the full moon. The sound repeats, but now it's so loud it awakens the forest. Fate is startled by the tremendous noise. After a brief silence, the protagonist looks below and sees a giant goblin wearing a necklace, walking. As the monster moves away, Fate curls up in the tree and simply watches from the branch. The green beast was dragging a person slowly, taking them somewhere. The protagonist nearly vomits at the gore. People don't go into that forest, so it must be one of the hunters from earlier. The protagonist is indignant to see that those arrogant men were so fragile to end up like that. After a few seconds of mourning, Fate uses appraisal. By analyzing the monster, he discovers that it's the Goblin King, also known as the King of the Forest. Encountering this type of monster was a rare event that spelled the end for those unlucky enough to find him. Fate notices the skill regeneration and starts wanting it for himself, so he tries to think of a strategy to attack the monster. The Goblin King enters the forest carrying the body, disappearing into the darkness. Fate descends from the tree, already decided on what to do. Follow the Goblin King. The monster arrives in a field of white flowers with a dead tree in the middle. A bizarre yet paradoxically beautiful scene. He settles right there on the trunk, sitting and crossing his legs. Then he begins to feed on the pile of flesh he carried in his hands, devouring with such delicacy that he ends up dyeing the white flowers a vivid red. Fate watches the monster eating from afar, but the whole scene makes him nauseous. Greed thought it was obvious what would happen with the body. This time the protagonist had nothing to say against it. Defeated people serve as food not only for goblins, but for any monster, especially children. Fate, not wanting to hear any more of that, asks the sword to stop with the explanation. The protagonist already knew all of that, but seeing the truth happen before his eyes is a different experience. The sound of bones falling on top of one another was quiet, but loud enough to send chills. Fate takes a deep breath, gathering his energy. With a determined look, he musters courage. Clenching his fists as if trying to squeeze his fear in his hand, he puts his plan into action. He will circle around the large dead tree. He will hide in the shadow of the tree and slowly approach. Greed recommends he go slowly without any fuss. With every step the protagonist takes, you can hear his heart pounding with anxiety. But he couldn't hesitate any longer. There was no turning back. Fate was so close to the Goblin King's back that he could see every muscle in its massive arm. The protagonist hesitates a little, forcing Greed to give the signal to attack. Our hero attacks the goblin like he always does, with a single sneaky slash. As usual, he thought he had defeated the king with that alone, just like with the other monsters. But Greed warns that it's too early to celebrate. Fate is startled by what he sees. Even with an arm rendered useless, the Goblin King roars with life. The Goblin King lets out a cry loud enough to be heard throughout the forest as he raises his club to attack. Greed tells Fate to fall back. Our hero jumps like a rabbit running from a wolf. The monster's club hit the ground with such force that the crash sounded like a log falling from a building. Even dodging the blow, the debris scratches Fate's face. The protagonist is several meters away, relieved to have survived, but the weapon quickly warns him not to let his guard down. The goblin roars again, but this time his eyes exude uncontrollable fury. He shortens the distance between them in an instant. Fate didn't have time to retreat farther. With a blow from his mighty club, he cuts through the air like a sword. He tries again with a second strike, powerful enough to break rocks. Then, holding his weapon like a dagger, he pierces the ground with a lightning-fast thrust. Even after dodging those 3 blows, Fate feels that he would be defeated if hit even once. Our hero looks at the goblin's club. The weapon looked more like a mountain that could crush him at any moment. The protagonist's eyes begin to show fear, his courage fading. But Greed calls for the trust of her wielder, belittling the enemy's weapon. Fate closes his eyes, thinking that this wasn't the time for doubt. Holding his only ally in this critical moment, the hero opens his eyes and charges at the enemy. Both opponents strike at the same time, eye for an eye, weapon for weapon. But in this clash of wills, Greed manages to overcome the overwhelming force of the club. Fate finally finds an opening. Without hesitation, he jumps and attacks the monster's remaining arm, completely disarming it. Before, the Goblin King only roared in fury, but now he screams in pain. Fate takes advantage of the momentum from the fall and prepares a sword strike on the defenseless Goblin King. The king had nowhere left to run or defend himself. Only his mouth remained, now showing only despair. The weapon hits its target, piercing a fatal point with no chance of return. Victory is signaled by the final cry of the defeated monster, the full moon marking the end of the battle in silence. Gluttony activated, regeneration added. Fate swings the sword in the air to rid it of the excess blood while observing the fallen king. The protagonist looks up in sighs as if releasing a massive weight from his chest. He lets himself fall to the ground, relieved that it's all over. The sword says it now has what it needs to unlock its next rank. Fate is surprised to hear that, since greed never reveals her true nature. She says she can take on new forms as she receives status from her wielder. And to change rank, she would need all the attribute points Fate had accumulated since the time they met. Fate complains about the cost, but Greed quickly defends herself, saying it's in her nature to take everything. But the sword soon gives him a warning. If he doesn't unlock the first rank, he'll lose the right to wield her. There are only two choices for Fate: fight and risk everything alone, or grow stronger with a reliable ally. Silence hangs in the air as Fate looks at his black sword lying on the ground. He smiles and calls her greedy, saying there's no need to even think about the answer. Our hero gently grabs her by the hilt. As Greed was his only and faithful companion, he accepts the proposal. The sword promises that he won't regret this choice. Then a golden aura begins to rise from Fate's body. Our hero feels something leaving him. The blade starts to float in midair, surrounded by golden energy. The protagonist observes that his status had decreased, confirming the weapon had absorbed his points. Then Greed, in her new form, confirms that everything is ready, but now she no longer looked like a sword. She had become a magic bow. The weapon now reveals that she can help Fate in two distinct ways, supporting both melee and ranged combat. Fate feels a small joy inside himself upon seeing the rank change, like a trainer watching his Pokemon evolve. Our hero realizes this is only the first level, and Greed confirms the evolution goes up to the third. However, far more attribute points will be needed to reach those new levels. Hearing this, Fate becomes a bit anxious. Then his bow senses something lurking. Alerted that something is approaching from behind, the protagonist turns to see what's happening. Dodging by a hair's breadth, our hero avoids being hit by an arrow. The projectile hits the ground with a sharp sound that cuts the grass. Definitely not a good sign. Fate scans the darkness of the forest in search of his enemy. Someone's aiming at him. Alone in the middle of the dense forest, Greed warns Fate that something has locked onto him. Another arrow comes. Our hero jumps and narrowly dodges again. Then he uses the massive body of the Goblin King as a barricade to shield himself from the incoming arrow barrage. Greed urges him to try hitting them using her new form as long as he has an idea of the enemy's location. Fate didn't have any arrows at the moment, but the bow assures him it can create them using mana. Pulling the bowstring and aiming toward his possible enemy, a golden energy projectile forms. Then Fate shoots. Hitting his target like an experienced sniper, a goblin is defeated. The protagonist hears the cry of pain from his enemy fading into the darkness. He sighs, relieved to have survived another fight. He approaches the already defeated monster on the ground. It was just a poop archer hobgoblin. Strangely, the soul of the defeated was consumed by greed. Looking at the starry sky, Fate was satisfied with his victories and decides to head home before sunrise. Greed asks if he would take the king's ear, but the protagonist rejects the idea because it would attract too much attention. However, he changes his mind and thinks of something. Sometime later, the Goblin King was missing some cartilage, and Fate was leaving carrying a bag in his hand. Now in the morning, with blue skies and calm clouds at Roxy's mansion, someone was knocking at the door. Fate wakes up due to the noise that refused to stop. Still sleepy and with gunk in his eyes, he goes to answer the door to see who it was. But he quickly gets startled upon realizing it was an unexpected but welcome visitor. It was Roxy carrying a large basket of grapes. Being a good friend, she asks if Fate is feeling better. Still awkward and surprised by the visit of a beautiful blonde with ocean blue eyes, the protagonist remains silent and frozen. Roxy finds her friend's unusual behavior strange and assumes he's not doing well, but Fate quickly replies that he's fine. She came to check on our hero's condition and also brought a very sweet breakfast to brighten his day. They were fresh grapes collected from the fields of the Hart family territory. Fate accepts the gift and forces a conversation, asking if her lands produce a lot of fruit. Then she picks a grape from the basket. Roxy holds the fruit up to the protagonist's face, dragging the conversation along as she tries to add more to it. Blushing all over, Fate gets flustered and gooey at seeing her act like that. Regaining his composure, the protagonist says the grapes look delicious. Man, she summoned him. Suddenly, a voice finally breaks that cringe moment, calling Roxy. The sound comes from a woman with glasses and an imposing posture, emanating a sinister aura behind the blonde. The glasses were so clean they gave off a sharp shine that sounded like gold clinking. Roxy notices the aura of the maid and turns to her, saying she'll be there in a moment. As she walks away, she tells Fate to get plenty of rest. But she remembers something else along the way. Roxy planned to return to her territory very soon and invites him to go with her. Hearing the door close, Fate freezes while digesting those words. Then he blushes again after realizing that it was practically an invitation to a date. He still can't believe that a commoner like him could help a noble with family matters, but he still wants to become someone. But his self-esteem doesn't let him hold on to that dream as he doesn't believe in himself enough. Then he remembers that it was his day off. Regaining his confidence, Fate clenches his fist with strong resolve. The bastard decides to go drinking in the city. Drunk Fate walks through the city's commercial district in search of booze. Since it was still too early to drink, he decides to kill time browsing the nuns' stalls. Abusing appraisal to analyze the items for sale, he even considers buying a jar. But a skull-shaped mask is what catches his attention the most. Using appraisal, he discovers that this equipment has the ability to hide the user's true identity. After making the purchase, Fate carries the mask in his hands and Greed agrees it was a good deal. Since the protagonist intends to hunt monsters daily, he also wants to hide his identity during the hunts. Then a group of people mentions the word goblin, which scares Fate. They were talking about the discovery of multiple goblin corpses, speculating that some kind of monster is roaming around. The name Hud Bullock was mentioned, saying he was investigating. Fate immediately recognizes that hateful name. Remembering all the suspicious things surrounding that surname, the protagonist becomes extremely irritated. But this was a perfect opportunity. Gritting his teeth in determination, our hero decides to investigate the Bullocks. But another name draws attention in that conversation, the Goblin King. That morning, someone had thrown 2 ears from that monster into the orphanage in the poor district as a donation. Fate listened to that conversation in silence, even though he was the benefactor. Our protagonist imagines the little girl who had been kidnapped, celebrating and happy because of the donation. The group continues saying that the children from the orphanage had a good meal that day. The protagonist looks up at the sky and feels satisfied with his heroic deeds. Taking small steps toward his next path, the sun casts a righteous beam across his back, blessing his fate. It was already nighttime, and the only thing left in the sky was the Milky Way and quiet clouds. A shadow breaks the silence as it moves quickly. A hobgoblin is startled and looks toward its predator. The figure rushed like a beast hunting its prey, charging at the green monster without hesitation. Leaping into the air, the silhouette obscures the moonlight, looking more like a phantom. Then the hobgoblin is defeated by a sword strike. After some time, Fate was resting on a tree trunk, and Greed thought he was getting used to that life. For the protagonist, this went beyond a simple routine. It was a necessity to never fall into starvation mode again. Looking up in deepened thought, the protagonist regrets not having been able to learn anything about Raphael and his family. That group was definitely up to something evil, but Fate had no proof. Greed agrees that they might be a wicked family, but certainly not foolish enough to leave traces. If they wouldn't come out of their holes, then Fate planned to lure them out with bait. Noticing something happening, the protagonist thinks it's a good time to use his plan. A group of 3 people was hidden among the trees, watching hobgoblins. They were patiently approaching the monsters from behind. Meanwhile, the protagonist followed them from afar and observed how things would play out. Finding a good vantage point to see the whole scene, he hides behind a tree and waits for the right moment. One of the men in the group tells his companion not to be terrified, but they were all scared shitless. What they feared most was the rumor of the monster roaming the area. Gathering the courage to face the hobgoblins head-on, the 3 men ready their weapons. Then they charge. However, a dark figure rushes in front of them and defeats the 3 hobgoblins within seconds. Frightened, they look toward the one responsible. It was a ghostly figure with a cadaverous face, wielding a sword as sinister as a scythe. The figure flees upon noticing the group of men standing there. Running into the forest, it looked more like a giant bat flying into the darkness. The group is left speechless, having witnessed the infamous wandering monster. As Fate moves away, someone calling him Lich reaches his ears. Creating a good distance from the group, the protagonist looks back and believes the plan worked. Greed points out his dark and ominous appearance, which made him look like a lich. Fate's plan was simple: keep revealing himself like this until the Bullocks bite the bait. But even mentioning that name makes the protagonist's blood boil with rage. Then a chill runs down his spine. Something strange with silver hair was approaching fast, emanating a sinister aura. Fate looks behind him. He sees a muscular female figure with 2 prominent chest volumes roaring in fury. This thing was the Goblin Queen. Something was off about her behavior. It wasn't typical for a monster to be that enraged. Then Fate notices a necklace in the Queen's hand, remembering it belonged to the Goblin King. Breaking as hard as he can, he turns to face the monster. The Goblin Queen wasn't there to hunt prey, but to avenge her husband. The muscular female figure attacks him with a powerful punch, but Fate manages to dodge by jumping. The monster wastes no time and attempts another strike while the protagonist was midair. Spinning his body, Fate manages to dodge the blow and survive yet another attack. The hero lands a few meters away from the Queen, but a sinister aura was gathering around her. Then she screams toward the sky, releasing red sparks of pure rage. Fate watches it all silently, observing all that fury being unleashed. Greed mourns that the Queen has gone insane and her movements can no longer be predicted. But the protagonist does not fear. He jumps. Mid-air, he switches Greed to bow mode and aims at the monster's head. Preparing a golden projectile that lit up the night's darkness, Fate charges his attack. The energy arrow is released from the bow, flying at its target like lightning. Then it blinds one of the Goblin Queen's eyes. The monster screams in pain and places her hands over her face. Fate still remained in the air. Switching the weapon mode, he now wields his black sword and prepares to attack. Seeing the monster's blood falling like tears from her blinded eye, Fate apologizes. The Queen is defeated. Striking a pose with his feet now on the ground, Fate cleans the blood off the blade with a swift motion of his sword. Then the Goblin Queen falls to the ground with a powerful crash. As he absorbs the monster's soul, the protagonist hears screams. The sound came from the same group that had appeared earlier. They were now running away after seeing the end of the fight. Fate realizes he had been discovered again, and Greed comments that he's exposing himself too much. But that was the idea. The more noise he made, the faster the Holy Knights would come after him. Switching to a scene with a clear blue sky, we're at Roxy's castle. A few days had passed, and Fate continued his Batman-style routine, working as a gardener by day and acting as a lich at night. But no Holy Knight had appeared yet. He considers getting information about Raphael through Roxy, but needs more clues first. Then a female figure stands in front of the garden gate, and Fate immediately notices and recognizes her. It was Roxy herself admiring the place. Fate approaches her and comments on his friend's outfit. Roxy greets him, calling him Faye, and says it's perfect timing. She has a job for our protagonist. a super secret and special job. The two lovebirds are in the middle of the garden when Fate asked about the job. Roxy points her finger like Uncle Sam, asking the protagonist to accompany her to inspect people. Our love-struck hero finds the job a bit strange. The girl gets close and whispers in his ear, saying it's a top-secret inspection. Roxy justifies it by saying that inspecting people is a very important task for a holy knight. The lovesick idiot Fate believes every word and thinks it's amazing, such a shameless suck-up. Then she pulls him by the shirt, saying he'll be her guide. Fate is dragged out of the garden like a sack of potatoes. Roxy was very excited to inspect people. The scene changes to the city, where Roxy is admiring something. Our hero watches her from a distance, happy to see his friend enjoying her self-examining people. Even though he was dragged out there, Fate feels content seeing her smile. Roxy was a holy knight and acted like one, but deep down, she was just an ordinary girl wanting to have fun, wanting to be a good friend. He decides to be a proper guide and asks what she's been inspecting so intently. It was a bunch of jewels for sale. She finds them cheap, costing 1 silver each. In reality, that's expensive for a minimum wage worker like Fate. Fate looks to the side and sees something interesting, asking the vendor what it was. It was a gem ore, a sort of gacha where you try to win a gem by picking the right rock. The vendor says it only costs 10 copper coins, but even that only is a lot for a worker like Fate. Seeing the girl's curiosity about possibly getting a gem from that kind of gamble, the MC thinks it's worth it. Using appraisal to cheat, he picks the lucky rock. Our hero offers that rock to his friend like it was an engagement ring. Roxy is surprised by the little gray gift, and Fate says it's a present for everything she's done for him. The protagonist was going to ask for a hammer to crack the ore, but the blonde just splits it with her bare hands. Both the vendor and Fate are shocked by her strength. But let's not forget, she's still a holy knight. Roxy holds the small gem up to the sky, admiring how the light reflects off the crystal. She finds that little moment beautiful. Then she calls Faye's attention. She thanks him and holds that feeling dearly in her heart. Our hero accepts the thanks, even if a bit embarrassed. Some time passes, and a boy who had gotten separated from his mother is holding back tears. Our hero couple is keeping him company, willing to help. Roxy takes the lead, trying to get more information. But she asks too many questions, sounding like a loan shark demanding repayment and scaring the kid. The tears he had been holding and now burst out. Roxy steps back and leaves it to Fate to handle. The protagonist suggests they search for the boy's mother together. The crying boy asks if that's okay. Our hero gives a reassuring smile and a thumbs up, saying yes, cheering up the boy. They both head into the city holding hands, while Roxy stays behind, envious and wishing to do the same. The group asked a few people but had no success. Then they visited other places but still found nothing. Eventually, they had to take a break because hunger caught up with them. The trio has fun eating skewers. Fate devoured his like a dog. That evening falls, and our two lovebirds look like a family walking hand in hand with the boy. They rest by a fountain, disheartened by not finding the boy's mother. Fate suggests starting the search again the next day. But the boy cries, missing his mother's presence. Roxy tries to comfort him by offering the boy a place to stay at her house. The kid had reached his limit and could no longer hold back his tears. He shouts loudly for his mother, crying more water than the fountain itself. Our heroic dude didn't know what to do at that moment. Then a female figure came from afar, shouting for her son. But don't worry, this time it wasn't the Goblin Queen. The boy jumps from where he was sitting upon seeing his mother approaching. The two embrace while our duo watches from a distance. They're happy to see the day ended well for everyone. The mother lowers her head in gratitude to the two, and Fate gives a slight wave goodbye. The boy looks back, thanking his caretakers. Roxy also waves goodbye with her hand. Fate thinks the boy got quite attached to them in that short period, but then he notices something strange on Roxy's face. She had a serene smile, and her blue eyes made a beautiful contrast with the red of the sunset. The protagonist stares at her for a while, as if looking at a work of art. Roxy asks if something was wrong, making Fate turn his face to hide his blushing. Terrified of the glasses-wearing maid, the knight starts running, wanting to get home quickly. In the middle of the run, she says she's going to take Fate to her territory on the weekend, asking him to go together. Blushing a little, our hero accepts the invitation while trying to keep up with her run. With the people inspection work finished, they both run into the city, heading into another day. Roxy asks Fate if he didn't like the idea of visiting her family's territory. She asks that while they're riding in a carriage, having the impression that her friend wasn't happy with the idea. It's not that he's unmotivated about it, the problem was the blelics that occupied his mind all the time. He replies that he was looking forward to that date, arguing how the grapes the other day were delicious. Roxy smiles and says how their gluttonous hero loves to talk about food. Looking out the window of the vehicle, she comments that these lands weren't fertile in the past. A lot of effort was invested to turn that lifeless soil into productive farmland, being the pride of the Hart family. Our flattering hero comments on how amazing that is, making his friend feel proud of her surname. But there's a downside to this story of dedication. It attracted monsters interested in looting the harvest. These thieves were kobolds, creatures that moved in packs and were strong enough to defeat an average warrior. They came down annually from the northern cliffs to steal crops. Roxy was sure that this year would be no different. Fate's hungry belly lets out an unexpected growl, making the knight giggle slightly. The protagonist realizes that Gluttony was tired of devouring goblins and longed to consume the souls of the kobolds. A shout calling for Roxy interrupts their conversation. She opens the vehicle door wanting to know what's happening, and the coachman was scared of something. Fate also tries to look at the reason for the scream, but is met with something unexpected. Kobolds. But no, they're arrow wolves, monsters that inhabited that field. Our heroic couple jumps out of the carriage and prepares to fight the threat. Roxy immediately takes the lead. With a serious face and her soldier mode activated, the girl orders Fate to stay behind. Then a fast, lightning-colored slash appears as if born from thin air. Moving like the wind, Roxy easily defeats an arrow wolf. Suddenly, she jumps high into the sky, startling the other nearby canine. The sword falls and hits the beast at a vital point, giving it no time to react. Roxy lands right after, softening the fall by tracing an arc through the air before touching the ground. Fate watches that battle in silence, admiring his friend's fighting skills. With the airwolves defeated, the knight swings her sword to the ground, getting rid of her enemy's remains from the blade. After all the commotion, we're finally at the Hart family mansion. A beautiful Mylf introduces herself to our heroes. It was Roxy's mother in person. She notices the unknown male presence accompanying her daughter. Asking his name, our hero straightens his posture upon hearing the question. Roxy quickly introduces him, and Fate bows his head respectfully, saying it was a pleasure to be there. Aisha Hart smiles serenely, returning the greeting. For some reason, the protagonist is impressed by the gentleness of a woman who should be bedridden. The woman skips the introductions and gets straight to the point. She asks if Fate likes her daughter. Roxy gets embarrassed by her shameless mother. Our love-struck hero freezes, trying to understand the situation. Regaining his composure, Fate clears his throat to prepare his ceremonious response. He confesses that he'll always stay by her side, saying that he admires Roxy and would support her until the end of his life. The protagonist didn't think much about the weight of his words, being more concerned about the difference in social status between them. However, the consequences of his confession became clear, or maybe not so much from his perspective, when he noticed something strange about his friend. The girl had restless hands, and her shy smile seemed to hold a mix of embarrassment and happiness. Then she turns around, saying she's going to her room, and runs away. The airhead Fate doesn't understand what just happened. The poor fool still hasn't realized what he just said. Aisha smiles melancholically, as if she'll miss these moments, then asks the protagonist to take good care of her daughter. The day was ending and the birds were returning to their nests. Fate was returning from the grape harvest and was worried about how quickly time had passed. But during his walk, he notices something strange. A feminine silhouette was approaching on the horizon. The girl was carrying a huge axe with the same design as Greed. White tattoos marked her forearms, but what stood out the most were her eyes. The closer she came, the more imposing that stoic figure with silver hair and blood-red eyes became. Fate compares those red eyes to his own pupils when in starvation mode, both reflecting the same shade of color. Even feeling a strange nervousness, he activates his appraisal and tries to get a good look at what she was. But the girl approaches and calls out to him, catching his attention. Our hero notices something wrong. The appraisal didn't work on her. The red-eyed girl asked if Fate was listening to her. Even suspecting her, our hero wanted to know what she wanted. The warrior replied that she didn't want anything and that it was still too early. The protagonist didn't understand what that meant. She was there to hunt kobolds, but decided to leave the hunt to him, demanding that he now owes her one. Even so, the protagonist insists on knowing what was too early. But he's ignored by the girl, who walks away on her path. Our hero, left hanging, watches her disappear into the distance. He suspects that those eyes might be the same kind as the ones from starvation mode. Roxy appears, calling out for Fate, looking for him. His distressed face is quickly noticed by his friend. The protagonist tries to calm her down, saying that nothing happened. Even though her friend seemed fine and safe, Roxy notices the girl walking away. Observing the warrior carrying a giant axe, the knight wonders if she might be a galleon. Fate remembers having heard about them but can't recall many details. So he asks his friend if those people hadn't been nearly wiped out a long time ago. Roxy replies that the galleons were natives of the Gallia continent. Their main characteristics were dark skin and silver hair. She also mentions that this race might have once been part of a great nation that existed ages ago. But it was the first time Roxy had seen someone so similar to the rumors about that people. After finishing her explanation, she watches that enigmatic figure of an extinct society walking off in the distance. Then she calls Fate back home. The scene shifts to the Hart Mansion. It's still late afternoon. A huge and luxurious banquet was waiting for our gluttonous hero. Roxy announces dinner time for her dear and beloved friend. Then Fate, wanting to be a great servant for his waifu, becomes determined to serve the meal to her. But the knight just stares at him, as if asking what he was still waiting for. Pointing to a chair beside her, she tells our hero to sit down. Fate is surprised to realize that a place was reserved just for him, right next to his darling no less. So surprised that he looks to the other two servants, trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank. Then he's pushed toward the chair. The protagonist tries to resist, embarrassed and hesitant. Now the two are side by side at the dinner table, Fate with embarrassment written all over his face and Roxy smiling at having her friends so close. The girl tries to ease him by asking him to forget the formalities and eat however he wants. Our hero accepts the request without thinking much. After all, he's the embodiment of gluttony. While eating and lightly dirtying his cheek with food, Fate feels joy from enjoying such a peaceful moment. Roxy gently laughs upon seeing her friend so happy with something so mundane. But to her, that was enough. Following the same rhythm, she starts dining beside him. Together, they look like a couple living an ordinary and peaceful life. After dinner, Fate was walking alone with one of the castle's maids. She says she's grateful he accepted the invitation because it had been a long time since Roxy smiled that much. Our hero remembers his friend's tragic situation and promises himself to do everything in his power to help her. The scene shifts to nighttime and we are in the dense forest, the stars illuminating the night's darkness. Fate was alone, talking with Greed about the strange girl from the Gallian people. and he mentions how her eyes reminded him of the starvation mode form. Greed simply responds that she has something special, and that soon he'll understand why. Our hero enters the forest's darkness, but he couldn't shake off the worry in his chest about what was to come. Hidden in a bush, Fate finally discovers what had been spoken of since his arrival: kobolds. Our hero uses appraisal to learn more about his new enemy. They were two kobold juniors with medium strength up skill. The protagonist was already excited to have a new skill in his arsenal. Greed advises taking the initiative. Without fear, Fate charges at the two canines. Then one monster goes straight to the coffin. The other tries to run away, scared by the surprise attack. But Fate doesn't let it escape and shoots it with his bow. With both enemies defeated, Gluttony feeds and obtains the medium strength up skill. The protagonist finds the scarcity of humanoid canine creatures in that place peculiar. Greed believes the monsters must be on alert due to the incident with the arrow walls. Finding it all suspicious, Fate hopes the mansion is safe and pleads for Roxy's safety. Fate was walking with Roxy, thinking that the day would be a great time to harvest grapes. The knight introduces him to the peasants. Our hero struggles to keep up with the work pace, which makes his friend laugh. These happy moments were interrupted by the arrival of night. The protagonist continued alone along a deserted trail. Fate plans to level up more before the scheduled day of the hunt. Then two reconnaissance kobolds appear walking in a ravine. Our hero was watching them from above, hidden in the bushes. Greed suggests advancing to see what was hiding further ahead. All they find is a kobold army, but a tall and fierce figure with blue eyes stood out among them. This was the Alpha. Fate doesn't understand the new word. Greed explains that it was a special category of monster, but says it'll be easier for the protagonist to understand using appraisal. Fate discovers that it is an assault kobold with a staggering 6 digits in each stat. The weapon warns him that if that thing reaches heart territory, disaster will fall upon the mansion. Not even Roxy could handle it alone. Fate gets worried, deciding to do something about it. Then he shouts, announcing that he'll eliminate all the enemies. Summoning the bow form, our hero fires volleys of arrows, taking down the reconnaissance kobolds. The Alpha sees that bright light but can't identify the shooter and orders something to his subordinates. Fate notices the leader's gestures. It seems they were still cautious. With appraisal, the protagonist analyzes the new enemies approaching. They were 2 assault kobolds with 5-digit stats. He then decides to change location to lure the creatures away and isolate them from the group. He hides behind a rock, waiting for an opportunity. One of the humanoid canines seems distracted by something. Then Fate jumps and slashes through the bundle of fur. The other canine tries to howl to call for help, but Fate already fires an arrow at him to avoid more trouble. Gluttony activates, adding medium agility up to his arsenal, but our hero notices something different. He felt more cheerful and invigorated, a feeling that went beyond simple satisfaction. The protagonist imagines that this might be Gluttony celebrating finally having a different meal, so he decides to check his status to see his attribute values. Our Sigma hero was already very close to the Alpha's numbers, needing only one more assault kobold. He already finds a target. He readies his bow and shoots at an unsuspecting kobold, but a massive hand stops the mana arrow as if it were nothing. The Alpha had successfully protected his ally. Fate is surprised to see his attack intercepted so easily. The big canine lets out a powerful howl, calling his allies. Now that he's been discovered, our hero feels that he's in trouble. A large army of kobolds was approaching, all of them thirsty for blood and battle. Greed recommends running, but Fate's eyes show no fear, only the decision that there was no escape. The memories of kindness and warmth from people who barely knew him, and the sweet smile his friends showed even after so many losses. Our hero didn't want to lose any of that. None of this small happiness he experienced every day. Fate readies his bow. Greed suggests that he evolved by defeating the weaker monsters. A volley of light arrows strikes their targets, defeating many enemies. But it still wasn't enough, leaving the protagonist frustrated. Greed suggests using the bow to keep the kobolds under control and then attacking with sword mode. Fate continued firing. The arrows pierced through their targets with precision, but the Alpha simply caught the projectiles with his hands. Our hero prepares to switch weapons, realizing the bow did nothing against the large canine. A powerful howl echoes and several kobolds respond to the call. Fate accepts the challenge, pointing his blade at the enemies. The protagonist manages to defeat several of them, clearing a path to the leader. Suddenly, the Alpha lets out a powerful roar. He strikes Fate with a quick slash in his claws. Luckily, it hit the shoulder, not lethal enough to stop our hero. The protagonist maneuvers around the creature, running as fast as he can, and charges at another kobold, scoring another kill. An intimidating shadow looms over Fate's back. It was the Alpha preparing another attack. Our hero reacts quickly and blocks the blow with his sword, but it was too strong for him. The force of the attack shatters his defense, sending the protagonist flying into a rock. The impact was strong enough to knock the wind out of Fate. Kobold Alpha wasn't like the other monsters our hero had defeated. This one was on a completely different level. Greed yells for his wielder to get up, snapping the protagonist back to his senses. A quick strike came from the enormous monster. Fate manages to roll to the side and escape. Even in a situation beyond bad, he admires the strength of his opponent. But our hero is still dazed from the impact on the rock, unable to stand. Another kobold appears before the fallen Fate. The monster places its foot on his stomach, pressing down hard. The protagonist gathers enough energy to grab the monster's leg, and then tears off a large chunk of flesh. The The creature loses its balance, and Fate manages to recover just enough to stand and grab his sword, and defeats his enemy. Gluttony activates. Our hero finally reached the power level necessary to defeat the Alpha. The kobold leader was still unscathed, staring at our hero. The final battle was near. Fate stood face to face with the kobold Alpha. His physical stats were already hovering around 300,000. The protagonist had defeated too many kobolds and realized he had drawn aggro. The monster's rage gave him goosebumps. Greed asked him to stay calm. Any mistake in this situation would cost his life. Suddenly, the kobold Alpha closes the distance in an instant. Fate is startled by the monster's speed. By a hair's breadth, our hero dodges a deadly blow, moving to the side. Our hero truly feels in danger, especially with the enemy targeting his vital points. With little choice, the protagonist runs from the creature, radiating a sinister aura. After gaining a safe distance, he comes to a halt. Even with better stats, the battle experience of the kobold Alpha was still far greater than his. There was also something strange about the creature's attacks. Greed confirms it was a skill belonging to the monster. Activating Appraisal, the protagonist examines the creature's window more carefully. There was a description of a skill classified as an art that made its unarmed blows hit enemies from the inside out. Even understanding how the attacks worked, Fate still didn't know what to do about them. Greed asks to switch forms and go into bow mode. The protagonist questions why. The weapon demands he change form immediately. Our hero complains, calling him impatient. Fate fires an arrow, but it's blocked by a kobold. The Alpha had protected himself using one of his subordinates as a shield. Fate still thinks it's pointless, but sword mode wouldn't be of much use either. Greed promises it would end the monster in one hit if at full power. The protagonist asks what he should do. The bow replies that it only needed to feed on attribute points. Our hero asks how many. The answer was 10%. Before more words could be exchanged, the monster quickly approaches. Fate panics, realizing he didn't have much choice. Accepting the proposal, Greed congratulates the decision. As it absorbed his wielder's stats, a transformation occurred. Fate can't believe the sudden transformation of his weapon. The bow now towered over the protagonist and radiated power and precision in its new form. Saying it's still too early to be surprised, Greed tells Fate to show his new strength. Our hero yells, channeling all his energy into the shot, then fires a bloody Tommy gun. The projectile hits the chest of the kobold Alpha. Suddenly, an explosion of energy bursts from the point of impact, defeating the monster. While Gluttony savored the kill, Fate celebrated having won such a difficult fight, until he began to feel something strange inside him. Then, a horrible pain spread throughout his entire body. He felt as if he were being split in half. While he writhed in agony, Greed explained that Gluttony had become uncontrollable after consuming such a nutritious meal. Even while screaming in pain, his weapon asked him to endure it, or he'd end up in a state worse than starvation mode. With his face on the ground, Fate endured the impulses of his maddened skill. Some time passed, and our hero was still with his head down. The silence was suffocating, and the worst was uncertain. Gluttony activated, more than 850,000 points were distributed unevenly across his attributes, and the skill Unarmed Combat was added. Panting, Fate tried to get up slowly. Still nauseous from what had just happened, he mentioned how that had never occurred before. After going through such a horrible experience, Fate preferred to avoid having to feel that again in the future. But one thing really caught his attention: the damage that his bow's shot caused to the terrain. Greed replied that it was necessary to defeat such a powerful monster. Fate was worried about the future reaction of the residents. They discussed the passage of time and the changes in the landscape. It seemed the weapon had an abnormal sense of time. Our hero observed the huge crater left in the ravine. With not much else to do, he let out a yer days. A group of people gathered in front of the Heart Mansion. Roxy was present and in her soldier mode, commanding the start of the operation. Meanwhile, Fate slept like a log weighing tons in his bed. That lasted until the sun slapped him in the face, waking the miserable sleepyhead. He woke up startled, like someone who only remembers life after oversleeping. Leaving his room and running at full speed, Fate started to fear that Roxy might regret having brought him. A middle-aged woman, who seemed to be the head maid, noticed the protagonist awake. Our hero asked Maya about Roxy's whereabouts. She replied that the girl had gone out to hunt kobolds. Fate felt sad for being left behind. Maya reassured him, saying that it was Roxy herself who decided to let him sleep and asked him not to worry. Our hero didn't feel comfortable with that and let out a scream of frustration by accident. He felt like he was the only one in the mansion unable to do anything for the night, a useless person not even fit to be a servant. The protagonist wanted to be more useful to his friend, not just a decorative support in her life. Maya was surprised by Fate's conviction and said he could still catch up to her if he left immediately. Some time passed, and our hero was running desperately to reunite with his friend. Roxy was giving orders to the servants to clean up the battlefield from the night before. She noticed someone familiar approaching. Not believing that the sleepyhead had come out of hibernation, Roxy asked him what he was doing there. Kobolds were dangerous beings, and she didn't want to involve him in that. But Fate replied that he didn't intend to stay behind. Our hero was about to say something else, but something paralyzed him. Seeing Roxy's beauty up close had left him frozen, a typical symptom of having a crush. In truth, he couldn't relax without helping at least a little. Well, he wasn't able to express that thought. But there was another factor making Fate anxious. The destruction his era had caused in that environment was so great that he was afraid of being found out. Playing dumb, our hero asked what had happened to the scenery. Then Meg replied that it was already like that when they arrived. No one had discovered who did it yet. Just a trail of defeated monsters and a hole in the ravine were left behind. But Roxy had a suspect in mind, the Galleon girl. Fate was impressed by the deduction, but inside he was relieved that no one suspected him. Roxy continued speaking, detailing that the Galleon people had enough power to have caused all that. Our hero didn't know any of that and felt relieved to have a scapegoat, even if unintentionally. The knight tried to be a Sherlock Holmes and kept thinking about more suspects, leaving Fate anxious about being accused. At that moment, the protagonist remembered the silver-haired girl's warning that they would meet again. Realizing he got off the hook because of her, he promised that he would repay her next time they met. The day had passed and the sun was already setting. We were back at the Hart Mansion. Roxy asked Fate to rest properly. But before the protagonist could relax, the girl thanked him for his help and gave a brief, destiny-conquering smile. Our hero felt more revitalized upon seeing his crush thank him, making his lovesickness even worse. Fate was returning to his room until he was interrupted by something unexpected. It was Aisha with her maid. Our hero was concerned about her health, but she assured him she was feeling well today. Then Roxy's mother asked Fate to speak with her alone for a moment. The scene shifts to Aisha resting in bed and our hero sitting in a chair near her. She confesses that she didn't have much time left to live. Fate didn't believe that confession, but her violent cough made him change his mind. Aisha was standing only out of maternal concern, and the protagonist understood, remembering that her husband had died just a few days earlier. Knowing the end was near, she intertwined her fingers, accepting with serenity the little life she still carried. But Fate didn't understand why he should be the one to know this premonition. Aisha replied by saying that our hero could be the support for her daughter. Her father was gone, and the thought of losing her mother made the knight suffer. But when Fate was by her side, she smiled sincerely again. The protagonist still didn't accept being someone worthy of that. He felt that his skill was also a bad omen. Aisha noticed that Fate didn't like himself much and gently touched his hand, offering silent comfort. Our hero was surprised by this sudden gesture and ended up accidentally reading the woman's mind. With a soft smile, she thought calmly, assuring him that she wouldn't ask anything difficult of him. Pointing her finger to Fate's chest, she made it clear that status or raw power didn't matter. The most important thing was the desire of the heart. Our hero was stunned to hear those words. With a melancholic smile, Aisha asked him to take good care of her daughter, as if she were passing him the baton. But Fate didn't believe he was capable of fulfilling such an important promise, and at that moment he couldn't accept such a responsibility. A group of warriors was walking through the night forest. They were hopeful they could get loot good enough to pay off the bills they owed. Something bloody nearly fell beside one of their feet. The reason for it was quickly made clear. It was a hellish scene. Countless fallen goblins formed a trail leading to a shadowy figure holding a sword. The creature cast a murderous glare at the group of warriors, who froze upon realizing the corpse had returned. The scene shifts to a sunny day. We are at the city gate with the cart parked. The protagonist was helping unload several crates alongside other servants, but not even the physical labor could keep him from noticing the presence of his crush, Roxy. She was walking briskly, heading directly toward the capital's castle. As he watched his beloved leave, Fate broke the crate he was carrying. He felt awkward for not being able to control his own strength for such a simple task. Another servant saw the scene and asked our hero Unga Bunga what had happened. He quickly apologized. The protagonist looked at his hands and made a mental note to remember to control the strength recently gained from the kobolds. The servant insisted on knowing if Fate was hurt, and upon hearing he wasn't, she felt relieved. Our affection-starved hero felt strangely happy that someone cared about him. That happiness was interrupted by a belly-craving souls, surprising his co-worker. Upon hearing the sound, she couldn't help but giggle. Fate made up an excuse for his hunger, blaming the physical labor. The scene shifts to the forest. It was nighttime, and a scream of pain echoed through the darkness. Fate was doing his usual nightly routine, annihilating goblins like a goblin slayer. He looked at the bodies left behind. Even after grinding a lot, Gluttony was still unsatisfied. Greed quickly explained that the skill would only be satiated by a soul of the same level as the Kobold Alpha. But Fate believed that eliminating weak monsters like goblins would be enough as long as he could feed Gluttony. His only battle companion warned him of a bad omen. This would only get worse. As if the premonition was becoming reality, something unusual began to happen to the protagonist. Fate removed his mask, complaining about a burning sensation in his right eye. Then he noticed the cursed red pupil, but only on one side. This was just starvation mode halfway. Greed warned that his desperate hunger would return again. Fate echoed the words spoken by his sword minutes earlier. It would only get worse from there on. The blade reminded him that time was running out, but the protagonist still hesitated to accept his fate. The night ended and gave way to a new day. The scene shifted to Roxy's mansion. Fate was doing his daytime job helping in the garden, but this time, he covered his right eye with an improvised bandage. The garden supervisor saw the bandaged head and asked what had happened. The MC said he had cut his eyelid. His boss didn't like that at all, but still asked if he could prune branches. Fate confirmed that he could. Hearing his employee's response, he decided to leave the nearest tree for him while he went to take care of the other plants. Our doormat hero accepted the job with great pleasure. While cutting the branches, Fate grew concerned about the red eye. a fact that proved the dissatisfaction of his skill. Holding his tool and feeling discouraged, he realized that hunting goblins would no longer be enough. As usual, his discouragement was interrupted by a beloved sight. It was Roxy returning from the castle. She looked very busy and walked without looking to the sides. The knight walked until she reached her father's grave. She intended to say something. Fate appeared, watching from a distance and hidden. His sneaky attempt was thwarted by Roxy's warrior instincts, and she quickly noticed her friend. Calling him by his nickname, Fate was startled. The first thing the knight noticed was the bandaged eye. Fate gave the same excuse, that he had injured his eyelid while sleeping. Making an expression of concern and hesitation, she asked him to be careful. Our hero noticed something was wrong with his friend. He clenched his fist and gathered courage to ask a question. Then he asked what had happened, since his friend was acting quite differently than usual. Roxy smiled at having someone trustworthy to support her and replied that nothing was wrong, but she was hiding something from him. Then the garden supervisor arrived and was angry to see his helper slacking off. Seeing Fate startled by his boss, Roxy laughed softly. Seeing her smile, the protagonist wished that these kind, hardworking, and dedicated people could live their lives in peace. Hours passed and the day was ending. The scene changed to a bar. Both the name of the corpse and that of Hud of the Blood family were circulating among the drinkers' tables. Some of them hoped the Holy Night would end the monster, while others showed fear of the cadaverous one. Fate was there, listening to all of it. Recalling how many suspicious cases surrounded that name, our hero realized it was time to act. As night fell, men gathered at the southern gate. Among them was the Holy Knight Hud Blullock, ready to fulfill his duty. Two randoms noticed the important figure and assumed that would be the day the corpse would meet his end. That large group was made up of adventurers of various kinds, whose combat specialties ranged from close to long range. Then one of the scouts returned from the forest reporting a trail of slain goblins. Upon hearing that, Hud no longer had doubts that the rumors were real. The target was operating that night. The voices of his brothers echoed like a vow, reminding him never to tarnish the family's honor, even if he was alone. But for Hud Blullock, brotherly solitude was no problem. Raising his hand, he commanded the beginning of the operation. The group entered the forest, but moving was difficult with so many goblins slain along the way. Greedy men coveted the ears of the fallen monsters, believing that leaving them on the ground was a waste of money. Time passed, and the search yielded results. A humanoid creature was found sitting alone and resting. One of his subordinates pointed at the seated individual and alerted everyone about the discovery. Then the knight ordered them to stop searching and confirm if that was really a corpse. Upon analyzing the individual's features more closely, one of them confirmed it matched exactly what the reports described. Another man cowered, remembering that this was the territory of the Goblin King and assumed the corpse had defeated that creature. Hud underestimated the enemy and didn't believe someone so distracted could have defeated that monster. Then the knight ordered his men to surround the target and wait for the signal to attack. The corpse was surrounded by some warriors hiding in the bushes, but the creature didn't move an inch. Hud smiled, thinking he had found an easy prey. Immediately afterward, he gave the signal to attack. The archers prepared their arrows and aimed at the target. The projectiles cut through the air in their deadly flight. The arrows shattered midair as if they had been sliced by the wind, unable to reach the corpse. Everyone was stunned, and Hud couldn't believe it, thinking it was just a stroke of luck. The rest of the group unsheathed their swords, wanting to close in. This time, the corpse had no escape route. Even so, he remained seated, unmoving. Watching that figure, who didn't seem to care about the presence of so many people, Hud felt deeply offended. The knight raised his sword and exclaimed his own name, threatening his enemy and vowing to defeat him. The bootlickers were soon convinced that the monster would tremble in fear upon hearing the voice of a renowned warrior. A swordsman claimed that Hud shouldn't dirty his own hands to face such a mediocre enemy and offered to handle it themselves. The knight accepted the suggestion, expecting to witness a massacre. But before the member of the Blullock family could react, one of the men at his side was suddenly attacked. The knight only realized the gravity of the situation when he heard the body of his subordinate collapse in the distance behind him. Now face to face with his enemy, Hud remained paralyzed in shock. Then the sinister figure used his art 1 inch and took down several warriors at once. Many of them had their limbs rendered useless, unable to fight and screaming in pain. Those who could still move ran for their lives, leaving Hud alone. The corpse took slow steps, marking the little time the knight had left to live. Blullock felt a chill run down his spine, making him want to back away. But his pride was more important than his own life, and he challenged the sinister creature with his blade. Then the corpse declared he had finally arrived at the main point of it all. Hud recognized that the monster's voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't remember who it was. He threw the rags and the black mask into the air, revealing his true identity to the Holy Knight. Fate couldn't believe that such a renowned warrior would appear in such a careless manner in that place. Hud was shocked to see that gate guard trash challenging him. Fate ignored him and demanded answers to some questions. Frightened and sweating cold, the Holy Knight felt humiliated being forced to answer questions from a supposed weakling. Then the protagonist offered two choices: answer and die quickly, or suffer slowly until the end. Hud's ego couldn't allow such an offense. Using his family name to defend his honor, the knight challenged Fate. Our hero accepted the challenge, drawing his sword from its sheath. Fate's resolve for the battle was strengthened by the beautiful memories he had acquired in recent days. Even if Roxy would be sad to learn of his secret actions, he accepted the burden of being a guardian of the shadows and would bring justice to those who did evil. Both warriors displayed a contrast of colors in their ideals and ambitions, staring each other down relentlessly. Fate had strength in his gaze, not a single drop of fear or hesitation in his spirit. Even so, he used appraisal to better understand his opponent. HUD's stats matched his rank as a Holy Knight, with over 100,000 points in each attribute. The Blelic member noticed Fate's lack of action, underestimating him and calling him a coward. It seemed our hero didn't even hear the insults from his enemy, focusing more on the Holy Sword art skill. Recalling a conversation at the bar, the rumors said that Holy Knights received a custom sword. This blade was capable of reproducing the ability known as Grand Cross, unmatched in terms of power. Fate asked Greed if that weapon would be a problem for him. The black sword boasted that a mere fake imitation would never surpass it. Now that everything was clear and victory was more than certain, our hero prepared to fight. HUD seemed to be losing his patience and was eagerly awaiting the chance to use his ability. Upon releasing Grand Cross, a white light emanated from the knight's feet. Those who dared touch it would be reduced to dust. Fate was unimpressed by the abilities of that piece of human trash. In an instant, our hero closed the distance to HUD, calling him slow. The Blelic member only had time to be surprised by the instantaneous movement of his opponent. HUD had no stats, no technique, and not even a good weapon to offer a worthy battle. His holy sword was broken in half with a single strike. The knight looked at the chunk of metal that remained from his equipment, unable to believe what he was seeing. Fate grabbed the flying piece of blade midair and returned the sharp object through the gap in his enemy's armor. The knight screamed so loudly that it woke the birds, sending them flying into the night sky. Clutching his wound, HUD rolled on the ground, unable to bear the pain. Fate found it shameful for a warrior of that caliber, so he lifted him by the neck. Our hero thought it was a great opportunity for a long and violent walk. Understanding the meaning of those words, HUD could not hide his terror at the idea of walking. Then Fate dashed off, carrying the grown man by the neck. In the middle of the dense forest, echoes of screams for help and the sound of something crashing against trunks and branches rang out along the path. Now that our hero had finished his walk, he looked at what was left of his travel companion. HUD was nothing but dust. The knight made a fatal mistake at that moment. He asked for mercy. But that word triggered in Fate the memory of the atrocities that he and so many others had suffered because of the Blelics. The once gentle and just protagonist now awakened an immeasurable rage in his eyes. Our hero threw HUD into the sky. Then he asked Greed to take 30% of his stats to fire 3 shots of bloody Tommy gun. The weapon fulfilled the bargain of his vengeful ally. Energy gathered in the black bow. Fate pulled the string. Shots tore through the sky toward the Holy Knight, who watched them with eyes wide open in pure terror. A rain of blood began to fall, pieces of flesh and armor torn apart from one another. HUD collapsed to the ground with white eyes. The minutes until the end of that warrior's story were drawing near. Fate approached his victim, who was completely disarmed and unable to defend himself or even run. A Holy Knight tried to breathe, but with difficulty. Fate realized that wouldn't be enough to defeat a warrior of that caliber. The protagonist's shadow loomed over HUD's face like a wolf hunting rats. Now the Blelic was cooperative. The hero's first question was about the other 2 brothers. He replied that they were on a campaign in the eastern mountain ranges. The second question was for information about Roxy. The Holy Knight replied that she had been assigned to a mission on the continent of Gallia. Fate became furious upon discovering that they were sending his friend to the same place where her father had died. HUD continued, saying that the Sky Dragon had made Gallia part of its territory, so someone needed to deal with the beast, and Roxy was chosen to be the martyr for the mission. Fate immediately suspected the Blelic brothers had a hand in it. HUD quickly revealed it wasn't just them. Other Holy Knights were involved, aiming to eradicate the Hart family once and for all. That confirmed the reason behind their suspicious behavior the other day. Then our hero asked the final question. Had Roxy agreed to this? Fate couldn't believe they were sending her to her death against that thing without her even knowing. HUD confirmed that it was a unanimous decision among all the Holy Knights. It couldn't be refused. The memories of that busy girl, going to find comfort at her father's grave, flashed through the protagonist's mind. The knight continued, saying Roxy had accepted the mission willingly, even knowing she might never return alive. Fate gripped the hilt of his sword. Of course she would say that. Of course she would sacrifice herself for the good of all. Even with his body completely wrecked, HUD begged for his life, promising he would become a better person from then on. That enraged our hero. There was no way such a sinful being could beg to live with such empty promises. Then he pointed the black sword directly at the Holy Knight's face. At that moment, the story of HUD Blelic came to a bloody end. Gluttony activated and acquired the stats and abilities of that man, but Fate didn't seem very happy about it. A bit of drool slowly dripped from our hero's mouth. The protagonist felt disgusted by the satisfaction his skill felt in devouring the soul of such a horrid person. Greed informed him that the requirements for the next rank had been fulfilled. Fate didn't think twice before accepting the evolution. The weapon was surprised by his friend's generosity. The protagonist replied that he felt disgusted carrying HUD's stat points. Laughing at his motivation, she began the rank up. With his stats returning to the hundreds of thousands, Fate was surprised by his new weapon. There was a large, sinister scythe. Greed explained that it could now apply curses to his attacks, but the protagonist's mind was elsewhere. Looking at the starry sky and feeling the warmth of the sunrise, Fate worried about how Roxy's future seemed cold and dark. The atmosphere was ominous, sinister shadows dancing in the darkness. Something was calling out to the protagonist. Fate turned, imagining it was Roxy. A huge dragon was behind his dear friend, and she didn't seem to have noticed the beast about to attack her. Then a flash of light swallowed the night, leaving nothing behind to tell their story. Fate let out a scream full of worry, calling Roxy's name. But our hero was in his bed. Then he realized he was just having a nightmare. Lying back down, he noticed the night wasn't over yet. He couldn't even remember how he got home. Tossing and turning under the covers, he looked at the ceiling and concluded he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. The protagonist got up and walked to the mirror. Checking the color of his pupils, it seemed that gluttony had calmed down for now. Fate sat on the bed, wondering why Roxy had never told him anything, thinking that she didn't trust him. Greed said that someone full of secrets had no right to demand trust. Hypocrisy indeed. The sword encouraged him to let go of that concern, saying it was just another burden to carry. Our hero told him to shut up already. The protagonist threw himself back on the bed, convinced that Roxy just didn't want to make him worry. His stomach growled out of nowhere as usual. Fate had been grinding a lot in the goblin field after resetting his stats, but his gluttony wasn't being satisfied. Then he worried about how long Roxy would spend in Gallia. Greed couldn't take it anymore and told him to get some rest, mocking his anxiety. Fate just turned to the side and pretended to ignore it. His sword saw how sulky he was and called him pathetic. The protagonist told it to shut up again. But Greed interrupted the moment with his friend to warn him about the commotion outside the room. The sound of hurried footsteps made Fate jump out of bed, not believing that the time had already come. He rushed out of the room and looked at what was happening. The other servants, holding back tears in their eyes, ran toward a certain person. Our hero sensed the urgency and started running without a second thought. All the mansion's servants gathered around Roxy, the atmosphere tense and full of concern. But a very dear friend of hers caught her attention, and with a smile that hid her sorrows, she said good morning to Fate. The protagonist asked what was going on, and his friend told him she had received a mission to go to Gallia. Our hero held back a scream, wanting to shout that it was the Blelic's fault, but all he could do was show a silent expression. Fate reminded her of the situation on the continent with the Sky Dragon and the fate her father met in that place, hoping she would stay. But the girl proudly said that she would inherit the family's duty in Gallia. Surrounded by people crying for her safety and well-being, Roxy thanked everyone for their concern. Our hero knew the truth and understood why she didn't want to say everything, but he didn't know how long she would remain there. She revealed that she might stay on the continent for 3 years, leaving Fate worried about the possibility of the Sky Dragon attacking during that time. Recalling Hub's words about the dragon's attacks near the edge of the continent, the protagonist's apprehension grew. Imagining the worst, a scene of Roxy losing to that beast flashed in our hero's mind. It was definitely an impossible mission for a holy knight to face alone. The knight, noticing her friend's distress, gave a soft and serene smile to comfort him, promising that she would be fine. Then she suggested that Fate work in Heart territory, so the Blelic's would never bother him again. Her concern only made him feel more guilty. He clenched his fist, trying to contain the chaos inside himself. He tried to say something to her, but the words wouldn't come out. The sudden silence caught Roxy's attention. The protagonist wanted to go with her to the continent, but his profane skill of stealing value from others was something that held him back. Someone like him, born with such a filthy and evil mark, had no right to stop someone so pure and righteous. Roxy took something from around her neck and called the protagonist by his real name. Showing a beautiful necklace with blue jewels, she asked if he remembered it. To the girl, that gem was a precious memory from the day they inspected civilians in the city, an ordinary but precious moment of happiness. Confessing that she always kept those moments close to her heart, she asked what he thought of the necklace. Fate replied that it matched her beauty very well. Then Roxy smiled for the last time, a farewell smile, to keep herself from turning back. Even though it felt like an eternal goodbye, she promised they would meet again, comforting her friend. Fate watched his friend leave and whispered a good luck wish for his beloved's mission. But it wouldn't end like that. Our hero ran with everything he had to somewhere. Reaching his room, he prepared his gear. Wearing his typical black battle outfit, he seemed determined to follow a risky path. Greed was the first to notice his ally's resolve. Fate's decision was to travel to Gallia, not as a servant to Roxy, but as a warrior. He didn't intend to let the knight discover his plan, but he would do everything possible to protect her. Fate said goodbye to the mansion friends, starting with the maids who gave him money for the journey. He also didn't forget the bar owner, who offered him a few bottles of liquor as a gift, and last but not least his gardening supervisor, who had taught him so much about plants. Setting off toward a new life, Fate took his path. The gate leading out of the capital was busy as usual, with many people moving about. Our hero cast one last glance at what he was leaving behind. The girl from the orphanage, the happy days at Roxy's mansion, that ultra-important mission of inspecting civilians, and so many other memories that city held. Looking at the castle, Fate felt like centuries had passed since he had been a guard there. He stared at his old self from the past, wondering what that version of Fate would think of him now. A lot had changed since then, and now he would head to Gallia as a solitary warrior. Even though his life had been marked by painful memories of humiliation and physical suffering, our hero still carried precious moments, which he would treasure in his heart until the end of his days. Before he could board the wagon and depart on his journey, he gave thanks for the time spent there and promised to return. The blue sky was calm and silent, as if time had stopped just to watch Fate head toward a new destiny. The sun bid farewell, letting the night take its place, and we find ourselves in a small house with the lights on. A child was tending to the wounds of another man, the blood-tipped spear indicating a recent battle. That little boy was Fate when he was very young. He told his father that he had finished the bandaging. The man noticed that his son had improved his first aid skills. The boy said he was always coming home injured, so it had become routine. Realizing how often he got hurt, the man apologized, patting his son on the head. Then they decided to go say hello to the protagonist's mother. Fate's father held his son's hand as they walked through the field. Then both arrived at an improvised grave, as if it had been made with their own hands. Our little hero prayed for his mother to watch over his father. He noticed how his father wore an expression of great effort, as if asking for something extremely difficult. Fate tried to reassure his old man, saying he didn't need to pray for something so complicated. But his father replied that he did it because he wanted to. Back in the present, greed woke our dreaming hero, saying he was daydreaming. He woke with a jolt and looked around to see if anyone had noticed. To his relief, no one cared. Fate wondered why that mockery came out of nowhere, and the sword hinted it just couldn't resist trolling a sleepy kid. Sighing, the protagonist already seemed to be dealing better with greed's sharp teasing. He looked outside the wagon. The scenery showed no sign of a large city. He had already traveled far from the capital. The coachman announced they were arriving in a city called Tetra. Fate heard that name as if he already knew the place. Upon arriving there in the late afternoon, there were still people walking between the urban buildings. To the protagonist, the city seemed a bit smaller than the capital, but still quite busy. He pulled out a map from his pocket and realized he would need another carriage to reach Gallia. Thus began the search for a ride to take him to that hostile continent. Unfortunately, he didn't find one. Deciding he needed to pay for a night's stay, he looked for the coin pouch he had received from the maids. He saw that he still had 5 gold coins. Though a good amount of resources, he didn't have the luxury of being reckless. In fact, our hero had already visited that city in the past. But back then, his desperate hunger hadn't allowed him to appreciate the place. This thought only made the protagonist's stomach sing its usual note. It was starving. After some searching, he arrived at a tavern. The place was packed with people, filled with conversations, and a wide variety of food and drink. Fate walked up to the counter to place his order. The attendant asked his new customer what he wanted. Our hero wanted to know what he recommended. Then he began to talk about the red wine and rabbit soup with bread on the side. It cost 20 copper coins. Fate thought the price was saltier than salted meat. Our penny-pinching hero insisted on bargaining until the price dropped to at least 15 copper coins. While waiting for his meal, he began to inspect the people around him. The tavern was crowded but followed a pattern. Apparently, 2 social castes frequented the place, merchants and warriors. All of them were well-equipped, clearly of high status. No wonder everything was so expensive. But it wasn't the time for that because the food had just arrived. Fate put his hands together and gave a hearty itadakimasu. While eating, he planned his route to pass through the major cities. That way, he could gather more information and feed his skill. Out of nowhere, a scream caught our hero's attention. A man with a large forehead was on his knees and head down near a table full of warriors. Fate seemed to recognize that person. With a small pouch of money in front of him, the kneeling man begged for help to save his village. The bald man got irritated and thought the payment was pathetic for saving a village. Still, the guy promised to pay more later. Then the warrior placed his foot on the man, stepping on his dignity. This time he wanted a request with more enthusiasm. The man's face was pressed against the floor, making it hard to speak, but he tried his best to plead for help. The group at the table laughed at how the big-headed guy tried to speak with his mouth on the ground. Then the bald man agreed to the deal, but he said he'd only do it a year from now and still demanded advance payment. The young man thought the terms were too slow and unfair. Upon hearing that, the bald man turned and told him to find someone else. Despair filled the big-headed man's eyes as he saw his only hope walking away. So he begged again for their help, but this time really got on their nerves. The bald man grabbed him by the collar, a vein of rage bulging on his shiny head. Preparing a punch, he said nobody cared about his village. Before the fist could land, fate intervened. The bald man got angry and tried to intimidate the protagonist. But before the warrior could say anything, our hero grabbed the poor guy's hand and gave it a powerful squeeze. With his fingers incapacitated, he apologized and agreed to stop with the bad behavior. Fate gave him a lecture, like a father telling his son to behave. The bald man sat back down with his group, and they all looked embarrassed about the situation. Our hero was surprised to find someone familiar in the middle of all that mess. The young man approached our hero and was shocked to recognize a familiar face. The protagonist gave the big-headed man an ironic look, saying it had been 5 years since they last met. He couldn't believe he was meeting Fate again. The big-headed man was stunned to find out that his savior was Fate. Making a face like he just dug up something rotten, our hero had flashbacks of his past. When he was a child, a disgusting boy used to throw rocks and yell insults at him. To no one's surprise, it was the same big-headed guy who used people as targets for fun. Little Fate cried and tried to protect himself, but not even his tears were enough to make him stop. Then fiery flames rose high, engulfing the small house where the protagonist and his father lived. Our hero screamed alone, and not even solitude comforted him. The young man seemed to remember what he had done. He clenched his fist, heavy with guilt, but there was something more important to do first. Kneeling with his head down, he pleaded for Fate's help. He said he wasn't shameless enough to ask forgiveness for what he did in the past, but he at least wanted a chance to get help. Our hero looked at the bald spot on the head of that shameless guy who had caused him so much sorrow 5 years ago. That bastard, besides calling him horrible names like Parasite, had even set fire to his house. But now he was with his forehead on the ground, begging and offering to sacrifice everything. Fate set aside his anger and seemed to pity the guy. Then he sighed, knowing that a normal person wouldn't help someone who had hurt them so much in the past. Our hero listened to the story. Apparently, winged monsters had started attacking the village, and the young man came to the city to hire powerful warriors to eliminate the threat. Our hero decided to go visit his old village to see his parents and feed Gluttony with some snacks along the way. With that settled, he gave the good news to the mealer. The young man was happy about it and suggested they leave in the morning, but Fate chose to go now. He found the decision strange as it was still night and there was fog. A lamp wouldn't be safe due to monsters. Fate found the idea interesting as it would make the job easier. Greed warned him that he was getting too cocky from only hunting weak goblins and reminded him how much trouble the kobolds gave. But based on Set's behavior, our hero was sure the village was in real danger. The young man hesitated to leave at night, but the protagonist reassured him, saying he could see well in the dark. The big-headed guy decided to do what Fate said, since he was the only reliable warrior in that place. Realizing that he had been called a warrior by Set, he was impressed by the personality change of that filthy boy from 5 years ago. Later that night, both were walking along a road in the middle of a plain past a mountain range. This path was nostalgic for Fate, who used to run through it without a care in the world. The nostalgia was interrupted by a rustling bush near the pair. Then a goblin wielding a club jumped out of the brush. Our hero told Set to step back and took down the monster with his sword. Both silently observed the fallen enemy. The young man thanked Fate, but the protagonist replied that the monster was weak and anyone could have defeated it. From Set's perspective, what just happened and what had occurred at the bar didn't seem like something normal. They continued their journey, and as they got close to the trees, the sound of birds singing could be heard. Fate found the noise strange. It wasn't something normal to hear at night. The young man looked down as if wanting to say something. Then he called for the protagonist's attention. Our hero stopped in his tracks the moment Set asked if he held any resentment toward the village. His silence was ominous. The answer didn't seem like it would be good. Fate explained that there was a possibility of resentment in his heart, but that place was still where his parents rested. Remembering his father's smile, our hero admitted he hated the village, but the memories of his family were more important. They finally arrived near the village entrance, but for some reason the atmosphere felt grim and eerie. Set suggested they go see his father, the village chief, to explain better what was going on. He bowed his head once again, pleading to exterminate the monsters and save the village. Fate remembered that filthy boy who mistreated him so much. It was not the same man now begging for his help. The duo received a welcome party, but only if insults counted as one. Fate had expected this would happen. A group of men armed with farming tools surrounded the protagonist. Those men didn't like seeing our hero back in the village and even called Set an incompetent successor. He tried to defend the protagonist, explaining that he was there to help fight the monsters. Fate saw the villagers' anger as justifiable. Besides the ongoing issue of poverty, they now had to deal with powerful creatures. All that negative energy gave our hero a headache, but another pain was reflected in his eyes. His skill was beginning to crave new victims. Regardless of what the villagers said, the protagonist would have to hunt the monsters. The village chief, an old man with a cane and a hunched back, appeared, calling his son knave and saying he intended to go to the city to hire new warriors. But a man asked what they would do if they were attacked again that night. The old man pointed to Fate and suggested using him as a sacrifice to offer the monsters. The protagonist couldn't believe they intended to use him as bait. Greed laughed at the situation, finding it hilarious that they considered serving our hero up like a restaurant dish. So Fate got ready, taking a stance to defend himself from the villagers who wanted to sacrifice him. Set grew worried at how the situation was escalating. He intervened and asked the protagonist to overlook what was happening. Our hero accepted the request and left the problem for his companion to deal with. The village chief approached and asked his son to keep an eye on Fate. Turning around, the old man warned that he couldn't protect him from everything. Then he left along with the other villagers. Both were left alone at the village entrance, with no one to accuse them of anything. Fate scolded his companion, outraged at having been offered up as monster food. Set offered to stay at his house as a form of apology, and reminded him that the protagonist's old house no longer existed. Our hero scratched his head, accepting the offer since there was no better option. Then the big-headed man pointed the way to his home, asking Fate to follow him. Upon arrival, the glowing lights radiated a sense of comfort. The door opened, revealing a little girl with short hair. She called the big four-headed man Dad and ran up to him, hugging him. Fate couldn't help but notice the word the little girl had said. Then the protagonist looked inside the house, searching for something. He asked about Set's wife, not seeing her anywhere. Fate's companion mentioned that she had passed away during the monster attack. Looking at the back of that poor man, which looked like a shield capable of blocking anything, our hero compared it to his own father's back. The protagonist realized the big twist. Set wasn't doing it for the village, but for his daughter. The little girl noticed the stranger standing there and asked her father who the black swordsman was. He pats his daughter on the head and replies that this man was Fate, the hero who would annihilate the monsters. Remembering her mother, the girl begins to cry, asking if the protagonist would avenge her. Set hugs her, bringing comfort to her heart that longed for a mother's love. Fate silently observes the scene. Watching that warm moment between father and daughter, our hero begins to miss his own parents. Sometime later, the two adults manage to cheer up the girl, who now laughed and moved about joyfully. The little girl asked her father to have dinner with her and said she was tired of being around her scary grandparents. Set understood the situation and promised never to leave her side again. Fate observed the gentle side of his companion with his daughter. Then he mentioned how much he had changed. The child's father looked down with the weight of guilt in his eyes. When he was a child, everything his father said became law to him, even motivating him to throw stones at people in need. But everything changed when he met his wife and started thinking for himself. Fate now understood what had caused the change in his friend. However, no one else in the village had changed so drastically. Dinner was ready and served on the table. Our hero tried a spoonful of the dish. Tasting the porridge, a nostalgic flavor filled his stomach. Was almost identical to what his father used to make. Eating that food and feeling such intense nostalgia made Fate realize that he truly wanted to return to his hometown. But that wasn't the reason he had come. Then our hero asked Set what the monsters attacking the village looked like. He responded that they were about the size of a goblin, with wide wings and sharp claws. Apparently, there was only one of them. This time, Fate asked Greed's opinion about the creature. His sword replied that it was probably a gargoyle, but the weapon warned that they usually began attacking gradually, only to swarm in groups when the time was right. The protagonist asked what night they would attack as a group. The sword replied that it would be on a dark night when clouds cover the moonlight and stars. Fate was shocked to realize that the attack would be happening exactly that night. Then screams of despair sang a deadly opera outside the house. Greed was excited to have more battles ahead. The terrified screams frightened both father and daughter inside the house. Fate got ready to leave and warned the two not to go outside under any circumstances. The protagonist stepped outside, but looking at the sky, it was already too late. Gargoyles carried people in their jaws, piles of bodies lay on the village ground, and despair was all that remained for those still alive. Fate used appraisal to analyze the winged enemy. Its stats were nothing compared to our heroes, and its skill was to shoot fireballs. The protagonist noted that this ability could become a problem if they started bombing in large areas. He drew his bow and aimed. Upon releasing the arrow, a gargoyle was instantly defeated. Fate absorbed the stats and the fireball skill of his enemy. However, when checking the body of the enemy, someone else was there. Our hero was shocked to discover who it was. It was the village chief, Lifeless. That meant no one was leading the evacuation. Suddenly, the winged monsters began preparing their fire attacks. More of them gathered and were about to begin a bombing run. Then a hellish blaze descended upon Fate, and Greed commanded him to transform into a scythe. Fate pushed off the ground for a leap. On top of a house, he held his weapon. Our hero prepared his scythe for the first time to attack. An aura of energy surrounded his body, pulsing with his essence and determination. With a powerful motion, he sliced through the air. Extinguishing the flames instantly, he eliminated the bombing completely. Fate was impressed with his new weapon, capable of cutting even through phenomena and events. The gargoyle attack continued through the night, and the village burned in infernal flames everywhere. Our hero was too busy trying to defend Set's house. The monsters grouped up and flew quickly toward the protagonist, wanting to finish him off once and for all. But this didn't intimidate Fate, who still held his scythe firmly. The gargoyles fired their fireballs at our hero, surrounding him in a fiery prison. The protagonist asked Greed to do what they had practiced. Our hero prepared his weapon, pulling it as far back as possible. Greed was launched like a sharp boomerang, cutting through everything in its path and annihilating several enemies. The scythe returned successfully to its wielder. The protagonist rejoiced in seeing his plan succeed. Some gargoyles tried to flee, screaming in despair. Fate shot energy arrows at them, preventing their escape. Greed warned that an imminent danger was coming from above. This time it was a gargoyle different from the others so far, preparing a huge fireball above her. Our hero and that monster exchanged intense stares amidst the chaos. Fate used his special vision to analyze it. The new enemy was a neo-gargoyle, the leader of these flying creatures. The winged beast held a fireball with both hands and flew toward the protagonist. The protagonist readied his weapon and waited for the enemy to approach. When the monster entered his attack range, Fate reaped it along with the fireball. Our hero explained the reason for his enemy's defeat. Close combat was the specialty of his scythe. Gluttony activated, fire resistance added. The protagonist confirmed that he now had powers and resistance against fire. Even after defeating the enemies, almost nothing of the village or the villagers had survived the gargoyle raid. Fate allowed himself a moment of rest, but felt an inexplicable emptiness in his chest. A voice called out to him amidst the destruction. It was Set asking what happened. Our hero explained in detail about the monster horde attack and how he had his hands full just trying to protect the two of them. This left that small family of a widowed father in shock. Fate looked at what was left of his old village. Even though he had been mistreated by the villagers since the beginning of his life, that scene was still lamentable. He wondered if that feeling came from the fact that the place had once been his home. But one thing was certain, his homeland no longer existed. Fate walked through the forest with determined steps, arriving at two makeshift tombstones covered by vegetation. That seemingly forgotten memorial was still bathed in moonlight. Nature seemed to care about the memory of those two. Fate approached them and said he was back. Apologizing for being late, he decided to clean the stones. Removing each speck of dirt as if erasing the marks of time, the two tombstones shone like morning sunlight. Our hero felt a sense of satisfaction upon finishing his work. But the most important thing was seeing that the two were there waiting for his visit. Fate remembered his father saying that smiling would make him feel happier. That's why both of them smiled, to try to feel happy and make their son's life less miserable. Remembering his old man's efforts, Fate said he was doing well in life. Now he had someone important and was heading to Gallia. Sworn to his soul, he promised to bring Roxy back to her home, friends, and family. Then he stood up, finishing his prayers. Without looking back, he walked away from the tombstones to continue on his path. Suddenly, Fate felt like he had heard familiar voices. He looked back, hoping to see those faces one more time. But all he found was the grave of his parents. With a lonely smile, he said goodbye. The calm of the night was broken when the protagonist heard shouts of anger and accusations. Set and his daughter were being targeted by the rage of the villagers who had survived the attack. He held her tightly, trying to protect her from so many wicked intentions. The group of men noticed Fate's arrival. They called him the bearer of misfortune and then told him to disappear from the village. Fate had already intended to leave before they even asked. But before leaving, the protagonist needed to finish something, so be prepared to draw Greed. The men noticed our hero's hostile movement. Now fear tamed the anger in their eyes, and they ran away with their tails between their legs. Then a gargoyle appeared, trying to attack by surprise. The protagonist's eyes stared at the approaching enemy. The enemy was defeated with a single slash. Having finally completed his mission in that village, our hero sheathed his sword to rest. Set, still holding his daughter, called Fate by name. He apologized to his friend, but the protagonist did not blame him for what had happened. He looked to the side and noticed the two stones resting a little further away. He asked if he had visited his parents' graves, and Fate confirmed his suspicion. Wanting to resolve his guilt from the past, Set told his daughter to wait for him at home. The girl began to take small steps, which seemed to move in slow motion as she walked away from her father. The moment the girl left the scene, he shouted for Fate to hit him with everything he had. Our hero thought that was madness, but this was no longer a matter of insanity, it was one of responsibility. Responsibility for what he had done in the past, responsibility for the evil of the village. Even if it wasn't enough for redemption, this was Set's resolution. Fate doesn't understand what all of this means. His companion reveals that he intends to leave that village and wants to live a normal life in Tetra. Now our hero understands the motivation behind everything. Finally, the request to take a punch was still standing. Set looks at his friend with conviction. The protagonist was still hesitant to accept it. Greed finds this interesting and then recommends a full-force punch. Fate refuses that recommendation. Our hero asks his companion to clench his teeth tightly. Then he prepares a punch. The sound of skin colliding explodes in the air, and Set's back slams hard against a tree. Fate is startled at having gone too far. He runs to try to help him, but the bastard on the ground was laughing, somewhat free from guilt and also relieved to have survived it. The turtle-like man laughed like a child. Fate looks at his friend and is left speechless. It was the same laugh his father used to make. The same kind of laughter that helped him move forward even with so many problems in his path, a smile of determination. Some time passes and Set thanks Fate for escorting them to the city of Trita. Then he remembers he hadn't paid him for the service yet, searching for coins in his pocket. But our hero refuses the reward, even with his friend begging him to accept it. The protagonist argues that the money should be invested in the girl's future and the new life they were starting. Set understands Fate's motivation and thanks him once again. Then the Black Swordsman says his goodbyes, wishing them luck on their new journeys. His friend and his daughter promise to meet again someday in a future that might come sooner or later. Our hero slowly walks away from the pair with calm and unhurried steps. Sometimes people really do change for the better. In the middle of the starry night, a girl carrying her enormous axe rested at the edge of a cliff. She felt that Fate was coming to meet her. The day was sunny, and the scenery was a lively green that radiated life and calm. A wagon was making its way down the road. Fate lets out a big yawn, bored by the monotony and tired from the trip. He was working as a bodyguard for the coachman, taking the opportunity to save money and hitch a ride. But the journey was too quiet, so quiet that it forced him to lie down and watch the clouds to pass the time. The sound of the yawn annoyed the mustached coachman, who kept his eyes on the road and held the reins. The mustachioed man still doubted the strength of his new bodyguard. Our hero had a somewhat skeletal build for the job. Fate assures him he can handle himself in a fight and reveals he has almost the strength of a holy knight. The coachman recommends not saying such things in the next town they were heading to. Apparently, the next stop was territory of one of those divine warriors, and speaking nonsense could result in execution. Our snobbish hero thinks it's a good idea to stay out of trouble so he can get good rest in the city. Greed recommends that beating up a holy knight would guarantee a good night's sleep. Fate refuses the recommendation. His sword encourages him to show the world how much of a galactic king she is. The protagonist calls her too greedy. As the wagon crosses the canyon, the sudden sound of falling rocks echoes along the path. The rocks frighten the horse, the coachman, and Fate all at once. Bandits surround the vehicle. The lazy and inattentive bodyguard hadn't paid enough attention to his surroundings to prevent this problem. Greed agrees that he was a terrible security guard, and Fate tells him to shut up and quickly unsheaths his sword. The coachman panics and begs the protagonist to kick their asses and prove he really is as strong as a holy knight. Hearing that, the bandits underestimate and mock the boy who barely looked out of diapers. The mustache man falls into even more despair, clinging to Fate. Unable to shake his client off, he uses appraisal on the thieves. They were just a bunch of weaklings, but the protagonist wanted to avoid taking human lives. Seeing the coachman clinging to him for dear life, the bandits confidently advance. Our hero prepared his spirit to fight. Suddenly, a massive black axe blocks out the sunlight. It was the galleon girl preparing an attack. She swung her weapon in a swift and powerful motion. The strike created an impact so strong it felt like a bomb had exploded, making Fate fear for his own safety. Reflecting on the shards of rock flying toward him, he wondered what was going on. The dust settled, revealing the female figure with brown skin and silver hair. Our hero remembers her from when they met in Heart Territory and wonders what she was doing there. The girl leaned on the upper part of someone as if demonstrating dominance over her enemies. She recognizes Fate right away. The protagonist was still quite surprised by all of it. The coachman wastes no time thanking her and asks for permission to continue the journey. The girl refuses the request with an intimidating no, but says she'll move out of the way if they give her a ride. Fate and the mustache are outraged by the audacity of the damn girl. After seeing the girl's boldness, our hero looks back. The bandits were still breathing, but beaten to a pulp. The protagonist questions who she was. There were many mysteries behind all of this. Then she tries to climb onto the vehicle, but ends up lifting the wagon like a seesaw, scaring the mustache man and his horse. Fate sees that and thinks forbidden words not fit to say to a lady. The girl says oops as if she forgot something, then commands her weapon, named Sloth, to reduce its own weight. The wagon returns to the ground. The mustache still can't understand anything about the situation. Our hero notices that the axe can change its mass by command, so he gets into the vehicle sitting next to her. Suddenly, she asks for his name. Noticing that he doesn't respond, she insists on knowing what the protagonist is called. Fate introduces himself, revealing his full identity. The girl promises to remember Fate of Gluttony. Our hero finds that strange since he doesn't recall revealing his ability. Saying her own name, Mine explains that she also bears one of the 7 deadly sins. The protagonist didn't seem to know about that skill category yet. The girl calls him immature for still not knowing this, then says her skill is wrath. She finds it odd that Greed still hadn't taught him how things work. The coachman's suspicious gaze discourages Fate from continuing the conversation there, even though they wanted to know what her skill does. Mine says he owes her one and that she will accompany him until he repays her. The protagonist asks if the debt was about the kobolds and the plantation in Heart Territory. Our hero admits that this would be a problem since he was busy with something, but she quickly retorts that she's also going to Gallia. With a scary expression, her wrath was clear as she said Fate would help her get to the continent. A drop of cold sweat runs down our hero's cheek as he decides to accept the proposal. Mine is happy to hear that, even though she was the one who forced his decision. Suddenly, the girl lies down and says she's going to sleep. Seeing that, Fate remembers Greed's recommendation to always rest when there's an opportunity. As the wagon continued its journey, our hero wonders if the wrath skill works the same way as Gluttony. Then the coachman announces they've arrived in the city of the Holy Night, and Fate looks at it in awe. Under the calm blue sky, the grand city rises, a testament to the glory and perseverance of the supposed Holy Knight who watches over it. The first thing Fate notices in the city is the large wall surrounding the area. He felt as if he were being cut off from the world. The mustache explains the strict hierarchical system based on skills used in that place. Then he asks the protagonist to look at the tattoos of the civilians. Our hero notices someone with the mark of a servant of the Holy Knight. Remembering how his life was in the capital because of his ability, the protagonist feels relieved for not being born there. Fate asks if travelers have to follow the hierarchical system, and the coachman says no, since it would discourage many from visiting. Our hero feels relieved not to have to reveal his skill to anyone. The mustached man reassures him by saying that warriors are well treated in this city and lack nothing if they decide to live there. But the protagonist refuses the idea, saying he had things to do and wouldn't stay long. Mustache points a finger and shows a path to the nearest tavern. Then he gives payment to the fake bodyguard. Before going his own way, the coachman gives one last warning: never disrespect a holy knight. After accepting the wagon owner's advice, Fate tries to wake Mine. At that moment, she turns. Her face was serene and her snoring was as powerful as a hibernating beast's. Our hero insists on waking her, lifting her by the shoulder. Greed warns him that this is a bad idea. Wake her the wrong way and the city is doomed. Fate lets go, afraid of the consequences. The sword continues, saying that the wrath skill is the most powerful in terms of raw strength. With nowhere to run, the protagonist carries her on his back like a child. Continuing on his way, he asks Greed if he already knew Mine. The weapon responds that they had once walked together long ago, and upon seeing her alive, says a phrase completely unrelated to the situation. Our hero doesn't understand what she meant by that. Greed makes up an excuse to say nothing, making Fate sigh and give up on continuing the topic. Then he connects some dots and wonders to himself if the axe could talk like his sword. Our hero tries to use his mind reading on the big axe. It was sleeping just as deeply as its wielder. Greed calls it lazy, so the name of the weapon was Sloth. Fate asks why the sword never mentioned them before. Apparently, she didn't want to get involved with that crowd again. Now our hero wanted to know about the other weapons with sin names. Greed explains that they were weapons of the 7 deadly sins, more powerful than those called holy swords. Our hero wanted to know if there were others like her. The weapon shrugs and avoids giving a clear answer. The protagonist presses the question, but now his sharp-tongued ally seemed blind or mute. Even without any answers, he continues thinking about the axe's powers and wonders if it also absorbed stats. A few minutes later, they arrive at a giant tavern. Entering it, they find various adventurers and merchants selling many items, including weaponry. Fate is impressed by it all, having never seen anything like it, not even in the capital. A short-haired receptionist with bangs covering her forehead asks if the protagonist will spend the night there. Our hero, backpacker of girls, confirms the request. He can't ignore the mark on the woman's neck. She was a servant of a holy knight. Fate receives the key to his room, but before he leaves, the receptionist warns him that visitors have limited freedom in that city, so she advises him to be careful when going outside. First the tattoos, and now this ominous warning. It seems that this holy knight wasn't so holy after all. The tavern was incredibly huge, leaving our hero stunned. The receptionist says that from the 1st to the 5th floor, there should be a total of 2,500 rooms. Fate is impressed, since even in the capital, the biggest taverns had at most 1,000 rooms. Seeing he was a first-time sailor, the receptionist introduces him to a guide. The protagonist feels relieved that he won't get lost in that labyrinth anymore. While following his guide, Fate talks with her about the size of the place and the capital's taverns. Hearing that he's from the big city, she asks if he came to hunt salmon. It seems the protagonist wasn't yet experienced enough to know what that name meant. She explains that this monster often appears near there, especially at this time of year. Fate's stomach is relieved knowing new dishes would be available soon, or rather, it got noisy. The guide hears the glutton's melody from her guest and suggests eating at the restaurant on the 1st floor. He says it's not necessary. Salmon were monsters that lived in the desert and could turn green areas into sand, or at least that's what our hero had heard. The protagonist crosses his arms. Those sand beasts seem like a pain in the neck. The guide serves him tea, confirming that they really were a nuisance to deal with all the time. While handing him the steaming cup, the woman teaches him about their weakness, the red core. She also mentions that they could be exchanged at the exchange house. Before leaving, she looks at Mine sleeping on the bed, and Fate notices the strange glance. The guide insinuates that they were a couple, making the protagonist a bit uncomfortable and startled. Trying to explain himself with a terrified look, the woman just chuckles lightly and mockingly as she leaves. Our lady killer hero looks at her, not believing the words she'd said. Then the womanizer looks at the sleeping beauty. Calm down, he didn't look in a pervy way. Since the girl slept more than a fat cat, Fate would have to go hunting alone. So he decides to write her a note. But the soul of a mischievous Brazilian awakens inside him, and he has a brilliant idea. To draw mustaches on Mine's cheeks. Greed clearly warns that this will only bring disaster to the world, but Fate assures him the ink will come off easily. Satisfied with his risky artwork, the bastard prepares his next step. He searches his bag for something. It was his corpse mask. Then he decides to adopt the title of the warrior corpse. Yes, I thought it was cheesy too. Snorting to himself, our cringe hero believes that with the mask, he will become unrecognizable. As the protagonist leaves the room, Greed doesn't seem optimistic about the fake identity plan. Even so, Fate continues on his way wearing his dark outfit as always, until he notices something big. A huge group of warriors is gathering in the hall. It was probably to hunt the Sandman. Not wanting to be recognized, our hero takes a different path. But during the walk, he notices that his hunger was strangely intense. Looking at his reflection in a window, there was that damn problem. One of his eyes was red due to gluttony. Greed thinks his wielder is too sensitive to the negative effects of gluttony and recommends learning to suppress it. Then he tells him to fight while he's close to entering starvation mode and learn to resist the skill's influence. Talking was easy, but for Fate, it was a necessity, so he accepts the training. While walking, our hero understands that his fate is uncertain and dangerous. Learning to deal with a problem like this should be his duty. Greed warns him, if he doesn't know how to handle a hunger twisting his soul, he will lose himself sooner or later. Hearing this, the protagonist accepts his new mission. Fate was hiding in a tree while following the hunting group. He finds it strange how they managed to walk in the darkness. Greed explains that they must be using some kind of magical tool. The sword explains that those items were of the same type as the cadaver mask. Since the night was dark and there were various types of nocturnal monsters in the area, a night vision magic item was essential. She continues saying that these pieces of equipment were mass-produced in the Gallian continent and are now rare and highly valuable. Fate understands what those accessories were and realizes that people can have more than one skill by choosing a kit of magical tools. Someone seems to have noticed a strange figure hiding in a tree, but finds nothing. Our runaway hero hides deeper into the forest, wondering if he should acquire some items. Greed says he doesn't need such trinkets. Gluttony already provides him with an unlimited stock of skills, but Fate still wants more gear for a bit of flair. The sword calls these things garbage and boasts that she's all he needs. In the end, the protagonist gives in and gives up on getting more equipment. Greed interrupts his friend's thoughts, saying he's losing sight of the group, forcing the warrior corpse to pick up the pace. After lots of walking, they arrive at a desert zone. According to Greed, the Sandmen are always trying to expand their desert, and in 1,000 years, that green area would also be sand. Imagining all those years is something impossible for Fate. Reflecting on time makes him admire the night sky. So many unimaginable years passed in his life, and the world will still continue. His weapon warns of the enemy's arrival, and the warriors in the hunting group had their weapons drawn. Grotesque creatures made of dry debris and organic remains began their merciless attack. Upon observing that walking dust heat, Fate's hunger became more intense. Our hero continues watching while holding his own stomach hole, wanting to learn more about his enemy. To do this, he uses his appraisal. These monsters were only a bit stronger than the rogue gargoyle, and their speed was extremely low. A mage from the hunting group casts a fire spell. The enemy screams in pain, as if its insides were turning into shattered glass due to the high temperature. Seeing that, Fate considers adopting the use of flame spells to defeat Sandmen more efficiently. Greed doesn't like this strategy, finding it boring and preferring a massive area attack. The protagonist disliked that. Our hero reminds her that the plan was to resist the effects of starvation mode, so destroying everything quickly was counterproductive. The sword agrees, but still wanted to see an explosive scene. After that, Fate starts looking for his prey. Taking quick steps along the cliff, he jumped from one spot to another with immense agility and precision. Finally, on the desert floor, Fate runs without hesitation. Then something starts to sprout beneath his feet. Our hero is a little surprised by its sudden appearance. It was a Sandman emerging from the ground right in front of him. The warrior corpse prepares his fireball magic. The flaming sphere burns through the entire path except the monster's head. Fading into the distance, bringing the emptiness of the void and hitting no living soul, the fire dissipates. Sandman attacks Fate, and the sound of the blow was almost muffled by Greed's loud laughter. Right after nearly being crushed, the protagonist apologizes, saying he's not used to magic. Then his weapon asks him to switch modes and transform into a bow. Our hero asks if they'll do the same as always. The bow replies by telling him to imagine firing a fireball while pulling the string. Fate prepares his attack, aiming at his target. He casts his fireball. A flaming arrow forms from his hand. Then he shoots. The fire projectile lights up the night darkness in its path, and its light was strong enough to blind the Sandman's eyes. The monster burns, unable to even cry for help. It works, says Fate. Learning the pattern to defeat this new type of enemy, Now all that's left for our hero is to carry out his training to resist hunger. He wonders if this will really work, but the only thing left now is to trust his weapon. Fate was lying on the ground, arms spread out and his bow nearby. He was tired after a few battles while holding back his incomplete starvation mode. His stomach played a hollow and substance-less melody. Our hero tries to get up, but it was difficult due to being skin and bones. So he asks his sword if it wasn't enough already. Greed agrees, congratulating him on his first day. Fate grabs his bow and shoots with everything he has at his target, asking if he had done well. The flaming attack hits his sandman, defeating it instantly. Our hero could sense them from afar. He assumes he's attracting aggro after having taken down 50 of those sand monsters. Then more dust creatures appear before Fate, giant and full of hatred, seeking revenge for their fallen comrades. But they are no match for the protagonist, who now had no restraints stopping him from fighting with all he's got. Suddenly, the smell of roasted meat reaches our hero's nostrils. Noticing something wrong, Fate tries to confirm with Greed if it was what he thought. His weapon replies that it was the Alpha approaching, and warns him not to repeat the same fiasco as last time. Running with everything he's got, our hero hears the desperate screams of the hunters. A colossal sand monster rose before the group of warriors like a lion preying on helpless rats. Some still try to fight back with everything they have, holding the front line while protecting their fallen comrades on the ground. The sand titan ignores the attacks that barely scratch him, then with a brutal motion tries to strike the pitiful humans. The squires leap in front of their companions, raising their shields to absorb the blow. Striking the ground, thousands of cruel shards hit the front line, injuring those who were desperately trying to defend their group. A fire projectile hits the monster's face. There was a mage trying to draw the Colossus' attention in order to save some lives. Not even that army of warriors seemed to be a match for that monstrosity. Many were already incapacitated, others panting, and the rest fighting at their limit. Even so, those who could still fight tried their hardest, some holding off the attacks while others channeled magic. Fate is impressed by the camaraderie, determination, and the indomitable spirit of those people who refuse to give up. Greed asks our hero if he feels any envy of that scene. The protagonist shrugs and continues with his work. As he slowly approaches the battle, he prepares. He starts by using appraisal on the monster. There's a sand golem with extremely high stats, with 2 attributes exceeding 400,000. There were still many people in that place. Seeing the group makes Fate uneasy. After all, he's not a protector. So our hero shoots several arrows in front of the hunters, startling them. The intimidating figure of the warrior corpse forces those people to stop their actions. A bald man in armor comes close, finds the protagonist's outfit bizarre and cadaverous, and asks if he wanted to help with the hunt. Fate says no, then continues, saying he just wanted the monster and they would only get in the way. The group disagrees, not wanting to let him fight alone. Our hero argues that they were too injured to help with anything and could get caught in crossfire. Looking at that group of different warriors, the protagonist silently apologizes to those determined souls. But seeing that so many people couldn't defeat that thing makes him uneasy. The golem raises its massive arm and hammers the ground with its hand. Fate manages to dodge safely, but the force of the impact and the shards still manage to deal some damage to our hero. The group watches that thing, which looked like a giant mountain of terror and despair, with eyes hungry for blood and battle. Then they make a decision after seeing all that. The leader asks the cadaverous warrior to return home alive. Fate is happy to have met a group of people kind enough to care about him, taking firm steps on that burning land without hesitation and without looking back. His black bow gleams as it reflects the shine of the stars of victory. Our hero wanted to finish this before mine woke up. Fate was beginning his battle against the sand golem. Greed says the enemy isn't different from the physiology of a sandman. Our hero dodges the monster's massive blows using small movements so he wouldn't lose mobility. He remembers another powerful enemy he had trouble with, the kobold Alpha. Back then, it was necessary to use the bow's secret technique to defeat it. But he knows that relying on only one technique to defeat enemies is not wise, so he switches his weapon to sword mode. The monster was big but also slow. Fate dodges all the attacks to get closer to the sand creature. Then our hero begins a dance of death with his black blade, planning to slice until he finds the core. While dodging a counterattack from the golem, Greed calls him a basic guy. But his black sword agrees that it would be a good sparring opponent, though she reminds him that it was still an alpha. Fate listens carefully to the advice of his loyal friend, and smiles knowing he will always have someone worrying about him at all times. The moon lights up the battle of that brave warrior who keeps his identity a mystery and dodges a monstrous blow in midair. With a quick slash, he manages to sever one of the golem's limbs. The sand monster quickly retaliates, but hits only empty air. Fate takes advantage of the opening and moves along the monster's massive body, cutting it in various places. Our hero finds it easy and senses something is wrong. It was too easy. Greed warns him something is coming. The sand golem was preparing to fire giant rocks from its back. Fate positions himself by jumping onto one of the stones. He tries to prepare a fireball to counterattack, but it was too late. The monster's body rapidly expands, revealing the core and launching several giant rocks in the process. Our hero ricochets off the ground, thrown far by the impact. After rolling for a long distance, Fate recovers and manages to stabilize himself. If not for Greed, the situation would have been ugly. He spits some blood from his mouth while listening to his sword's warnings not to lower his guard. The sand monster returned to its repulsive former shape, staring our hero like a delicious prey. The protagonist switches the weapon to bow form, planning to dodge projectiles while aiming at the core. He fires several arrows, the sound of the shots like a machine gun firing in war. The golem blocks the attacks with its arm, its form nearly complete. While the monster defends itself, Fate takes the opportunity to get closer and stand at the creature's feet. At that moment, the sand giant prepares another rock storm. A barrage of stones falls on our hero. It seemed that any sign of hesitation would bring the end of the story. The protagonist dodges each projectile with subtle and precise movements, doing his best to stay alert to every attack. The golem raises its arm as if lifting something invisible. Then a whirlwind of dark energy surrounds Fate. Our hero believes it to be the sandstorm spell. Now our hero is dealing with the stones and the damage caused by the storm. Battle of attrition begins. Greed warns him of an opening, and the protagonist breaks through all the barriers with his scythe. Nothing stops him. Rocks were cut, storms dissipated, and the enemy's arm was severed. Fate now stared his opponent in the face. About to deliver the final blow, our hero proclaims victory. The monster's body dissipates in the air, the red core revealed and defenseless. But the sphere moves quickly and escapes the scythe's strike. Fate lands on the ground and worries about the consequences of letting the monster roam free. If he lets it live, it will start attacking random people in the desert and cause massive collateral damage. Our hero is determined to end that monster once and for all, asking his loyal friend for help. Preparing his bow, Greed doesn't know where the core is hiding, so she'll need 20% of his stats to cause considerable damage. Fate accepts the trade without hesitation. Now our hero jumps high into the air, blocking the light of the full moon. He prepares a flaming arrow and fires. The glow of the shot falls like a shooting star, granting the wish for the battle to end. Upon touching the ground, a tower of fire rises into the air, burning the night sky and warming the cold gloom of the night. The monster's core flies out from the explosion. A crack forms on the surface of the sphere, which loses its red color as its life fades away. Fate touches the ground. His shot leaves behind a flaming crater that doesn't seem like it'll extinguish anytime soon. But the evil hadn't left yet. Gluttony activates and our hero prepares himself. Writhing on the ground, the protagonist resists the madness of his skill after absorbing such a powerful soul. The seconds that pass feel eternal, but Fate's sanity survives to live another day. Even drooling like a rabid dog, the negative effect of gluttony seems to have been less severe thanks to his training. Wiping his face, even with his hunger growing day by day, he can endure the agony a bit longer. The group from earlier reappears, startling our hero. Seeing the destruction from the battle, they wonder where the sand golem is. Suddenly, a black sphere falls behind the group. Fate says that Ball was the golem's core. The trio is surprised to see that he managed to defeat that thing. Then our hero realizes he had drawn too much attention. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.